to the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. At this time, we ask if you could please place your phones on vibrate or silent. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the meeting of the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. If you're in this room, you're here for that committee. If you're here for land use, you're in that one. Although we'll be talking a little bit of land use today. I'm City Councilmember Keith Powers, Chair of the Rules Committee, and before we begin, I want to introduce the other members of this committee who are present. We're joined by our Speaker, Adrienne Adams, Councilmember Justin Brannan, Councilmember Sylvina Brooks Powers, and Councilmember Gail Brewer, and we are sure to be joined by more shortly. I also want to acknowledge the new counsel of the committee, Jeff Campagna, not new to the council, but new to the committee, and the committee staff that worked on the appointments that we will hear today, Chief Ethics Counsel Pearl Moore, Director of Investigations Francesca Della Vecchia, and investigators Ramses Boudin and Alicia Vassal. By letters dated August 18th of 2022, Mayor Eric Adams requested the advice and consent of the City Council regarding the appointments of Gail Benjamin and Anthony Crowell, who's sitting in front of me now, to the City Planning Commission, Milton Williams to the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board, and Elisa Velasquez to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, and the reappointment of Sarah Carroll as Chair of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and they're all here today. Today's City Council will consider whether to give these candidates our advice and consent. Before we move into today's agenda, I want to recognize Speaker Adrienne Adams to offer opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair Powers. And I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues on the committee and the committee staff for their work on today's hearing. I extend my warm welcome to the 5 candidates who have joined us today and congratulate you each on your nominations. Each of you has a distinguished background in public service, spanning decades. I look forward to discussing your vision for the positions for which you've been nominated. I want to take this opportunity to extend a special welcome to one nominee in particular, Gail Benjamin. Gail has been nominated for membership on the City Planning Commission. Ms. Benjamin joins us today having spent 25 years in leadership with this council, serving under 4 speakers. When the Board of Estimate was eliminated in 1989, she set up the council's land use division and served as land use director until 2015, advising members on all land use applications subject to council review. She also served as acting chief of staff to the Speaker in 2004 and chaired the Charter Revision Commissions established by the Council in 2017. No other member of the City Planning Commission has ever had that much experience representing the Council's interests. Gail, thank you so much for your decades of service to this body, and welcome.
Thank you.
The appointments before us today include 2 seats on the City Planning Commission, a uniquely powerful body within the framework of city government that regulates all aspects of the built environment and how it is used. We will consider one appointment to the Conflicts of Interest Board, a body dedicated exclusively to maintaining the public trust in city government. We will consider one appointment to the Taxi and Limousine Commission, a body responsible for protecting both businesses and consumers in the taxi and for-hire vehicle industry as it undergoes the biggest changes since the establishment of the TLC. Finally, we will consider the reappointment of the chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This is a body that I am particularly sensitive to as the former council committee chair of landmarks dispositions and public sightings. The commission has the exclusive power to determine what history is significant enough to warrant the protections of the landmarks law. These are very important positions of public trust, and I look forward to hearing from all of you, all of the nominees, about what you will bring to your roles and how you hope to promote the public's trust in these institutions. Thank you very much. Welcome once again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to Speaker. And I share my enthusiasm for your nomination, well, all your nominations as well. We're going to begin today's hearings with 2 nominations to serve on the City Planning Commission. Before I introduce the candidates, I'll review the functions and membership qualifications of the CPC. City Planning Commission is responsible for the conduct of planning relating to the orderly growth, improvement, and future development of the city. including adequate and appropriate resources for the housing, business, industry, transportation, distribution, recreation, culture, comfort, convenience, health, and welfare of its population. CPC is also responsible for review of and has veto power over all proposals to change the zoning map, the city map, and the text of the zoning resolution, site selections for city capital projects, all major concessions, proposed franchises and revocable consents that the Department of City Planning determines would have land use impacts, proposed housing and urban renewal plans pursuant to state and federal law, sales, acquisitions, leases, or other dispositions of real property of and by the city, and the granting of special permits pursuant to the zoning resolution. The CPC oversees the implementation of laws that require environmental reviews of actions taken by the city, in particular City Environmental Quality Review, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. The CPC assists the mayor and other officials in developing the 10-year capital strategy, the 4-year capital program, as well as the annual statement of needs. CPC is also responsible for promulgating various rules, establishing the minimum standards for certification of applications that are subject to the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, commonly known as ULURP, establishing the minimum standards and procedural requirements for community boards, borough presidents, borough boards, and the commission itself in the exercise of their duties and responsibilities in ULURP, establishing specific time periods for pre-certification review of applications subject to ULURP, establishing the procedures for environmental reviews required by law, including the procedures for the preparation and filing of environmental assessment statements and environmental impact statements, establishing the minimum standards for the form and content of 197A plans, and listing major concessions or establishing a procedure for determining when a concession is defined as a major concession. CPC also has the power to modify any amendments proposed by the mayor to change the rules governing site selection and the fair distribution of city facilities. It also has the exclusive power to propose additional categories of land use actions to be reviewed pursuant to ULURP, subject to enactment by the City Council. The City Planning Commission consists of 13 members, with the chair and the 6 other appointments made by the mayor, 1 by the public advocate, and 1 by each borough president. Members would be chosen for their independence, integrity, and civic commitment. The appointments of all members except the chair are subject to the advice and consent of the City Council. CPC members, except for the chair, serve at the pleasure of the mayor, serve for staggered 5-year terms, beginning the day after expiration of the previous term. For purposes of Chapter 68 of the Charter, CPC members other than the chair should not be considered regular employees of the city. CPC members are prohibited from holding any other city office while they serve on the CPC. There's no limitation on the number of terms a CPC member may serve. The member who's designated vice chair receives an annual salary of $73,855. The other members receive an annual salary of $64,224. There will not be a quiz on this afterwards. Today we're joined by Gail Benjamin and Anthony Crowell, 2 candidates who have been nominated by the mayor for appointments to the City Planning Commission. Gail Benjamin is a Met resident of Manhattan. If the council grants its advice and consent, she'll be appointed to the City Planning Commission, where she'll succeed Richard Eddy and serve out the remainder of a 5-year term expiring on June 30th, 2027. Anthony Crowell is a resident of Brooklyn. We won't hold that against you. If the council grants its advice and consent, he will appoint to the City Planning Commission, where he'll succeed David Burney and serve out the remainder of a 5-year term expiring June 30th, 2024. Welcome and congratulations to both of you on your nominations, and thanks for being here today. If you can just raise your right hands, we'll swear you in.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and in all council member questions?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. We will allow each of you an opportunity to make an opening statement. We'll start with Ms. Benjamin and followed by Mr. Crowell. Rules Committee members should have copies of the candidates' opening statements in your booklets. With that, the floor is yours. You can, Ms. Benjamin, you can start off.
Thank you so much, Chair Powers. Good afternoon, Speaker Adams, and thank you for the kind words. I learned a lot and had a great experience in my 25 years here at the council. Again, good afternoon to the other council members of the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. That's Councilmember Brannan, Councilmember Brooks Powers, Councilmember Brewer, and my own Councilmember Hudson. First, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to appear here today as you consider my appointment to the City Planning Commission. As a former staff member of the council for over 25 years, I do not take lightly your interest in and responsibility for determining whether my candidacy is the right fit for the commission in 2022 and for the city as a whole. I hope that after evaluating my credentials, my 40 years of experience in government, mostly in the land use arena, my training and experience, you will agree that my voice will add value to the Commission's deliberations while helping to balance the diverse positions of those who participate in discussions on land use matters. My background is in urban history, which gives me a unique perspective when looking at New York City of today. The problems we're experiencing, particularly post-pandemic, are not new. They may exacerbate trends that began in the pre-pandemic days, and many go back decades. Often the city has tried various strategies to address these issues with greater and lesser success. It's important to be able to review new proposals in planning and development to solve perennial urban problems in light of our earlier attempts to do so. We can learn from our failures as well as from our successes. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in Queens in a NYCHA development, Pominoke, and my family was among the first to own and occupy an apartment in Rochdale Village. Both of my parents worked in government, and we were a middle-class Black family that was able to live and thrive in the city because of the many benefits offered to us by the city, from NYCHA housing and Mitchell-Lama co-ops, to libraries, excellent public education, to parks and playgrounds, to museums. I have always wanted to make sure that these opportunities would continue to be available to existing and future generations of city residents. I started my career in government with former Comptroller Harrison J. Golden and represented him at the now-defunct Board of Estimate. I learned much about how the city works and about the necessity to hear all parties, read all materials, and to consider the interests of all parties before coming to a decision. I learned that in a city where land is an increasingly scarce commodity, all decisions which affect how land is used are fraught with contentions. I learned that all politics is local and should not be discarded, but rather heard and discussed. At HHC, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, I worked to develop projects, more specifically housing for nurses, as a tool for recruitment and retention. I learned firsthand the difficulties and rewards of bringing development to fruition. As co-director of New York City SEQR, the City Environmental Quality Review, I was tasked with managing the regulatory process as well as presenting the findings of the reviews. While the review became a more contentious and visible process, it was during this period and due to the public interest that the first SEQR technical manual was released, which has been updated frequently since that time. Lastly, I spent the last 25 years as the director of the Land Use Division of the City Council. I assisted leadership in setting up the division, as well as determining how best to implement the new land use responsibilities given to the council in the Charter Revision of 1989. The division assisted all 51 council members, or more than 200 council members, over the period of time I was there. We functioned as staff to the Land Use Committee and the subcommittees, as well as performing the administrative tasks that enabled the council to handle their land use responsibilities. We all learned that the impact of land use is different depending on the community in which it is located, and that each community is unique. No singular solution will work citywide, so it is important to listen to all of the voices that choose to speak. Our city is facing critical challenges, and all of us must have as our first commandment to restore our city to good health in a way that recognizes the value of all neighborhoods and all citizens. We must present a well-balanced, creative, equitable, and legal set of solutions. We must be transparent in these efforts and seek to involve all parties in the search for these solutions. I am very excited to be part of this effort. Thank you for your time and attention.
So before we start, I want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Hudson as well.
Thank you. Chair Powers, Speaker Adams, members of the committee, including Councilmember Brannan, Councilmember Brooks Powers, Councilmember Brewer, and Councilmember Hudson. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss my nomination. I thank the many council members who reached out to me in the pre-hearing process. I also want to acknowledge Gail Benjamin, a fellow veteran of city service with whom I look forward to serving should we both be appointed to the commission. My entire career as a lawyer and organizational leader, which spans 30 years, has been in public service, building institutions, communities, and systems to better serve human needs and to advance justice. I care deeply about making our city affordable and accessible to those who need homes and jobs, and I care deeply about making our city more livable, safe, and healthy. It is essential for those charged with making land use decisions in our city to come together to address the affordable housing, homelessness, and global climate crises. We must bridge divides, work collaboratively and creatively across government to inspire innovative and meaningful opportunities to trigger affordable housing development, spur local business growth, reduce carbon emissions, and build our tax base. This means implementing land use and other policies to make New York competitive to attract businesses, both large and small, and residents both from inside and outside the city. New York City is a vast ecosystem. Thus, all neighborhoods need to be open to planning and growth, with a deep respect and commitment to serving local needs, while also respecting the broader citywide imperatives we share. I will approach my review of proposed projects with independence, the greatest of sensitivity and objectivity, and always seek to understand their benefits and burdens at both the local and citywide levels in order to make fair and appropriate decisions given the facts at hand. I have served in many leadership positions, but among my most valuable skills has been in acting as organizational connective tissue, listening, identifying common goals, translating, bringing people together, educating the public, and developing solutions in a transparent and open way, from which everyone can move ahead. I believe I'm a successful consensus builder and change agent, and I commit to bring fully the sum of my life experiences and skills to the City Planning Commission. I came from a working class background and was the first in my family to attend college. I'm a member of the LGBT community. My family immigrated here in the early 1900s, poor, and lived in the tenement houses of Brooklyn. Times were tough, but they sought refuge in New York City, as so many do. I studied urban policy and planning as an undergraduate in Philadelphia to make cities better and more just. After graduation, I worked for 5 years at the International City and County Management Association, known as ICMA, in Washington, D.C., and I put myself through law school at night during that time. At ICMA, I focused on federal policies impacting localities, including housing and community development, the environment, and land use. I also assisted in the preparation of amicus briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court in numerous cases, including land use cases. In law school, my focus was state and local government, housing and community development, and environmental law. As a student attorney in the Community Economic Development Clinic, I counseled low-income residents of a tenants association to work with nonprofit developers to transform their community into a limited equity cooperative. Instead of advocating for thousands of cities as part of a national association in Washington after I graduated law school, I came here to New York City instead to advocate for one, New York, the envy of all others. What happens in New York matters everywhere. That's why we're the world's second home, why other cities look to us for best practices, and why all leaders in the city land use process must listen to communities and work together to make the right decisions. Millions of people depend on us, and the world is watching. As a lawyer at the city's law department, I helped shepherd eminent domain proceedings to support urban renewal projects that would lead to the development of affordable housing and job creation. I also represented the city in real property tax litigation, defending the city's real estate property tax base, the lifeblood of our revenue stream. Later, I worked on issues concerning the impact of federal laws on the city's land use processes, as well as the city's street infrastructure, the building and fire codes, and matters of core governance. When the 9/11 attacks happened, I served as counsel at the Family Assistance Center and directed the city's death certificate program to assist victims' families. I joined the mayor's office in 2002, first as special counsel and then as counselor to the mayor. I served for more than a decade. Among the vast and diverse array of duties, I worked on the city's massive 9/11 recovery effort. I also supported and witnessed historic and transformative effort in local neighborhoods and economic corridors citywide to create new housing and job opportunities for those in need and to build our tax base. I also led critical reform efforts to promote government integrity and prevent conflicts and corruption, including in our land use processes. I have served on many boards and commissions which affect the shape and needs of the city, including the Economic Development Corporation Board, the Board of the NYC and Company, and the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce Board. But most importantly, I continue to serve on the board of the Brooklyn Public Library, where I have been a trustee for almost 20 years and board chair for 5 of them. During my time as chair, we have worked to develop a capital program to creatively finance system-wide library improvements, which included building new facilities in communities with the most need, and the positive impacts of that work are being realized daily as our work continues. Today, I'm immensely proud to serve as the Dean and President of New York Law School, which has 1,100 students, a very large percentage of whom grew up in New York City. They are among the most racially, ethnically, and religiously diverse students at any law school in the nation. 1/3 of them are first in their families to attend college, 32 languages are spoken among them, nearly 20% identify as LGBT+, and many of them attend law school at night while working full-time to support their families. NYLS is a microcosm of New York. It is also an amazing engine of social mobility, and working very closely with our students allows me to be in touch with their personal needs and goals as well as those of their communities. And with certainty, a lack of affordable housing tops the list of what I hear most from them each year. NYLS's robust curricular offerings and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have made us a recognized leader among law schools. We seek to connect our students with the drivers of the New York and global economies where their leadership is needed to forge systemic equity and justice. At the heart of our experiential learning curriculum is a deep commitment to social justice and economic opportunity. To those ends, we offer a broad range of community-based legal clinics, which my colleagues and I have worked hard to evolve over the past decade to help meet the vast needs of New York's underrepresented and marginalized communities. This includes clinics in housing justice, immigration, small business and nonprofit formation, special education, veterans' rights, and civil rights and disability justice. Over the past decade, we have built one of the most sophisticated housing justice programs anywhere in the nation. Our faculty were forceful frontline architects and advocates for the passage of the city's right to counsel law. And now, through our Housing Justice Leadership Institute, we are aggressively building the ranks and capabilities of lawyers, including our students, graduates, and many from other schools who will be called on to represent those facing the threat of eviction. We also house the Safe Passage Project, which over the past decade has become New York City's largest provider of immigrant legal services for children. Indeed, if there is one thing my experiences in government and law school management have taught me, it's the value of trust bred by sincere, clear, and transparent communication and constituent engagement. These tools are essential in any setting, but particularly in the land use process, where we must build community and engender widespread support that serves the bigger purposes of what we are trying to achieve. As I said previously, this is New York, and what happens here matters everywhere. When I think about my proposed role on the City Planning Commission, I recognize that there is, and always will be, so much for me to learn. Always being open to listening and learning and reaching across the city to bridge divides will be the keys to my success and that of my fellow commission members. I thank you and look forward to hearing what is on your minds today and offering you my perspectives. Thank you.
Before we continue, I just want to make an announcement. This is a public hearing, and we will accept testimony from anyone who is here from the public, as well as people on Zoom, at the end of all testimony from people who are nominated. There is no need to raise your hand on Zoom. You will be called.
Thank you. Before I go to questions, I'm now going to recognize the speaker for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome again to all of our candidates today. My first question will be to Ms. Benjamin. Welcome again. Great to see you as always. In your pre-hearing responses, you wrote that when reviewing UDAP actions for the disposition of city-owned land for the creation of affordable housing, the council should require HPD to provide all project summary information authorized by state law or exercise its power to disapprove the application. So my question is, why should the council bear the political burden of voting against a proposal for affordable housing when it's within the administration's power to provide a complete project summary and within the CPC's power to require such information prior to certification of a UDAP application?
This has been an issue for quite a while, and because of that and my history with this issue, I know that we have asked not we anymore, sorry. I know that the council has asked various administrations to provide that information with ULURP, UDAPs, and we have not, and the council has not met with great success. That is why I mentioned the ultimate option, because I do believe the information is important when considering the ULURP, UDAPs, particularly because they tend to be larger projects. The non-ULURP, UDAPs are 1 to 4 units, maybe quite a few buildings, but the ULURP, UDAPs tend to be on property that was owned by the city or where the city is contributing a lot, and the council deserves that information. It was the kind of doomsday scenario response, which is the council has asked for the information, has not been provided, and what do you do then? That I gave the answer in the worst of situations. It's, if you vote no once, I suspect that the administration will find a way to get you the information.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So what will you do as a CPC member to make sure that complete project summaries are always a part of CPC's review of the ULURP and UDAPs?
Well, I can speak to the question that I will ask for that information. I can't give a response here and now as to what I will do if the information is not provided, or, which has happened, the same information is not provided. On a number of occasions, the information that was provided to the City Planning Commission was not the same information that was subsequently provided to the council. So that is an issue that I would really have to look at and consider when I got the project.
Okay, fair enough. As land use director, you are actively involved in helping local members shape land use projects in their districts. As you know, the CPC doesn't always respect the deference that the council has historically given to the views of affected local members. What level of deference do you believe CPC should give to the opinions of local council members?
I think local council members are important because they know their districts, and they know how their district is looking to develop. I also think, though, that there are citywide issues that need to be balanced against those local issues. So I think that there's a deference that should be given to anybody who is really familiar with a community and knows both the physical part of the community as well as the political and social structure of the community and the neighborhood. But it does also depend on what the project is and my view of the different important aspects. I can't make a blanket commitment.
How did you feel about the council's position on the blood center?
I thought it was fine for the council to support the blood center. I thought that the blood center served, from what I read, I mean, I did not get the materials that you got or city planning got, but from what I read in the public, I thought that the blood center serves an important citywide process and that it was not out of line. The project they were proposing was not out of line for the purpose that they serve for the city as a whole. And so I thought that even though the local council member was opposed, that was an appropriate action of the council.
Okay. And my final question to you, and then I'll move on to Mr. Crowell. What criteria should the CPC use before advocating for the council to override member deference?
I think the criteria may differ depending on the project, but I think the most important criteria is how the project is important locally and to the city. With site selections, for instance, it's quite often that the project is important in a citywide perspective, much more than it is in a local community perspective. And so I think that that is something that has to be weighed by the commission. I also think in a site selection, how the agency has gone about soliciting both sites and opinions from a variety of communities about which the issue serves. When it comes to private development, I think that there are different issues to be considered. I think the physical change to a neighborhood needs to be weighed. I think the benefit that may be found both locally balanced against the impacts, both good and bad, that may occur locally. I think that the ability of the city to achieve wider goals that it may have, such as more housing generally, in addition to more affordable housing, I think we have to look at all of those issues in balancing when we try and overcome member deference.
Okay, thank you very much. Something else was spinning around my head in looking at it too, but I think that you got somewhere in that other question. I said it was my last one, but I think somewhere you got to that. I was going to ask, what are some more of those variables that really, really matter, or that should matter to CPC when considering member deference or not? And I think that you actually hit on some of that stuff in speaking about characteristics of the neighborhood and other things. So thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to know we've been joined by Minority Leader Joe Borelli and Councilmember Lincoln Ressler as well. Just to Ms. Benjamin, following up with a few questions. In your pre-questionnaire, you wrote that 197A plans represent an unfulfilled promise created by the Charter Revision Commission of 1989 because that section of the charter does not, this is quotes, does not actually accomplish the goals that any community plan might promote. Could you elaborate on that? And a question associated with that is, when the CPC approves the 197A plan, what responsibility do you believe the Commission has for making sure it accomplishes its goals when reviewing subsequent public and private land use applications?
Okay. The reason that I said that 197A plans had not achieved what the Charter Revision Commission hoped is, first, because very few of them have come forward or been approved. I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity of 13 that have been put forward by communities, although there have been some that have been put forward by the City Planning Commission or by DEP or other governmental agencies that have put forward a 197A plan. I think it's a very difficult process for a community to undertake because a community board, a community group is not empowered in the city to handle the many requirements that are put forth in the 197A guidance documents. Part of the promise that had been talked about was supplying each community board with a planner who could help them with that. These plans are very sophisticated documents, and even if you reach the hurdle that you can meet all of the requirements that are in the 197 guidance documents, it doesn't actually achieve the plan. If the plan suggests downzonings, which many of them have, it doesn't actually accomplish the downzoning. You still have to go through a ULURP and an environmental review to accomplish that. If the plan calls for a social service center, you still have to go through the budget process in order to achieve that. As I said, so a number of communities, rather than go through the 197A process and then separately go through those processes that would be required in order to implement their plan, have just gone straight to the implementation. Numbers of communities, I know some of yours, have worked with city planning and the borough offices to bring forth rezonings that they think are necessary to right-size new development in their community. I know that some of them have worked with social services and with HPD to plan for empty or vacant lots or for services that are necessary and where best they might go. So if I were in a position to do a 197A plan, I think personally that I would choose the route of working with the agencies and trying to accomplish what it was that a plan would do. And in terms of your question, the second half of your question, I believe that if a plan is adopted, proposals that come forth for that area covered by the plan should be judged against the plan. Some of them can't be. If the plan calls for a downzoning and the downzoning has not occurred, a plan that has the existing zoning or a project, it would be unfair, I think, to act as if the rezoning had occurred. Although I think it's fair to look at it and to look at the community's idea for a future development versus developer's idea.
Thanks. Thank you for that answer and clarification. I had I don't know if you have had a chance to read it, but I think it was the Citizens Budget Commission yesterday had a report that was about the land use process and the inefficiencies within it that range from state level down to the city. A lot of them actually were state level, seeker and other processes that need to be changed to the state level, but essentially created a set of recommendations and identified a number of challenges that exist right now in the process that make both creating housing but also development period unattainable, maybe is the word to use. You have so much experience working here in the council and looking at these issues. Can you, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, so I want to ask for your evaluation of that, but certainly would be interested to hear thoughts and recommendations where you might see inefficiencies or obstacles that exist right now when it comes to creating housing, creating new development and growth in the city.
I have read the CBC's report. I don't think it did a lot in terms of solutions because basically the solutions they offered, they said, were not really likely to happen. That the state was not likely to eliminate ULURP for residential housing. It is true that the environmental review over time has become an albatross. I agree. But is it an albatross that both communities and developers understand and use? For many years, when I was at Seeker, we did offer developers the option of doing a targeted EIS, that you would only respond in an EIS to those areas where you had a significant impact. And the other areas, we would just include a worksheet, which would have cut lots of time off the process. And we only, in my years at Seeker, we only had one project that chose to do that. Attorneys felt that they needed to protect their project and their client by having a full-throated EIS where they could show a judge that they took a hard look at every area, and none of them wanted to do it. In fact, if anything, when we would offer suggestions for doing not less fulsome analyses, but less discussion, Developers are so afraid of losing a lawsuit that they were uninterested. In looking at the report, though, I have to say that one of the things that bothered me was that they talked about the average time for a project once submitted to city planning being 2.5 years. And then most of their suggestions in the end had to do with carving off time for the council or taking the council out of the review process when the council has 50 days and that's it. So of that 2.5 years, things that affect the council seem to me to be the least efficient way to reduce the development time and development cycles. I said, I think seeker is one way to address it, but I think there's going to have to be both work on the federal level because seeker is a little NEPA. It comes out of the federal environmental laws. So we can't just eliminate it. Could we look at adding more things to the type 2 list and more types of housing? Probably. That is under the mayor's control. And the pre-certification time, since ULURP is a set 7 months, basically, if it's taking 2.5 years, the rest of that time is in the pre-certification and environmental review process. And I think if we want more housing and we want to provide it faster, that's where we need to look for some solutions.
Thanks, I appreciate that answer. We're going to do member questions, and then we'll go to Mr. Crowell for questions as well. So I think we have first, and this is for Ms. Benjamin. If you have questions for Mr. Crowley, we'll hold them for now. We're going to start with Councilmember Brooks Powers, Councilmember Brewer, Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you so much, and thank you both for your testimony. I will have to say, Ms. Benjamin, some of what I've heard from you is a bit refreshing. I'm very interested in tapping into your knowledge, and considering you have that urban studies background and the land use background, I'm interested in your perspective on the fact that there's been a significant decline in the African American population in New York City, and it could be for a number of reasons. I find that some of the land use actions have a potential to be able to help better retain families to staying in New York City in terms of affordable home ownership, for example. So I'm interested in understanding from that urban perspective and your knowledge and growing up in places like Southeast Queens, how do you think that the council and CPC could work to do a better job at that?
That's a big question. I mean, part of the decline in, or I believe part of the decline in the black population in New York is a percentage decline, and that's happening nationwide. Mm-hmm. But it is also true that part of the decline is people moving to the near suburbs and the suburbs that surround New York. In the 60s, when we moved to Rochdale, Southeast Queens was the suburbs.
It still is.
And the same was true. My grandmother lived in the Bronx, quite near to where Co-op City is now. We called it Freedom Land. But areas that traditionally had black ownership and home ownership have gotten smaller, as has the black populations in areas like Bed-Stuy and Harlem. It is clear that in the last census that we have information for, that both Harlem and Bed-Stuy are less than 50% black now. Those were home ownership and still are home ownership, and many black people saw a financial windfall and said, let's get out of here. And I get that. In terms of providing more home ownership opportunities, I think you're right, we have to look at the cost of home ownership and of the programs that we have through federal, state, and city government to sponsor that. I think that Rochdale Village, Co-op City, Penn South, all of the Mitchell-Lamas, which were destined and determined for middle-class housing, have done a great job at maintaining minority participation and residency. So I think that new programs that concentrate on that are possible, and that they are something that we should be pursuing, because I think over the years, the people who have suffered in the city from a lack of housing in many ways have been middle-class people, and that has led to an exodus of middle-class people citywide.
No, and I appreciate your perspective on that. And, you know, just broadly speaking, for anyone going on the CPC, I think it's important to look through that lens. I think has been a lot of focus on affordable housing, but it's been rental where, you know, folks are transient in that way. They don't really get a stake in the community and can be pushed out. Some of these developments have had unintended consequences that I've seen firsthand in my district as well. So I do appreciate that perspective and hope to see the CPC really pushing forward more affordable home ownership opportunities in the plans and proposals that come before the council. And I have this question, and I do have to step out, and I asked the chair if he can ask this for Mr. Cromwell also, but CPC Chair Dan Garodnick recently commented that rezoning proposals and projects are, quote, not explicitly local issues. These are issues that affect all New Yorkers and have an impact on our housing supply, job creation, and construction. Council members should certainly go to bat for community interests, and CPC wants to make sure to support them with that, but to look with an eye towards the citywide needs that we are facing and to balance out local concerns with the need for the creation of housing. If everything is just a question of does the local community support or not support it, the answer will almost inevitably always be no. So it can't just be that. It has a broader consideration. I'm interested in knowing if you share that perspective. I asked this question just to give full line of sight. So in my district, we've had significant development over the last couple of years, but there are times when land use projects come up and a member may have a different of opinion from what the plan may present initially. And like you've shared, like 50 days is really not enough to be as impactful in the conversation, and I hope that does change at some point. But I'm interested in knowing if you share that perspective also.
I am just hearing it from you right now, and I can't say whether I share it. I can say I think that where I started from, all parties need to be heard and their viewpoints examined before I can determine whether I think each one has merit and where the balance lies. It is true, sometimes communities don't want a building because it's out of scale. And there may be ways to address scale. Sometimes a community may not want it because they don't want the occupants who they believe will be in the building. And that's true in communities all over the city. That cannot be addressed in the same ways, particularly if it goes to how the project is being financed. Sometimes communities want a different type, as you're right, home ownership. I mean, I know in a project that was in Councilwoman Hudson's district, the community preferred home ownership because it was a home ownership community, and they believed that people who were homeowners, would contribute more to the community, would be better neighbors, because that's the community that they bought into. And they believed, and sometimes they're right, that they had a right to expect that the kind of community that they bought into would be stable. I think you have to weigh all of those things. There's no one answer for when a member or a community's opposition has to be observed.
No, and I definitely appreciate that perspective also. And I would even go a step further and say that even with these projects, it's important for the CPC to look beyond that one development to understand what the full impact is on a particular community, because it may be one location that's saying, okay, it's only 1,500 units, right? But then on that stretch of road, you may have like 5 projects happening at the same time, causing great stress to the community.
I mean, I think it's important to look at what City Planning Commission does in light of development and land use as a whole. I know you have to leave, but 80% of what is built as of right. So city planning is only dealing with the other 20%, but that's why I would agree with you. It's important to look at what the rest of the world is doing with that 80% that's as of right, in addition to the one project.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hear from Councilmember Brewer, followed by Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you both, and I want to thank the mayor's office for giving us the opportunity to talk earlier, and it's been nice to work with you for the last quarter of a century in both cases.
You make me feel old.
Both of you. So I have some small questions. I don't know, I know time-wise, if you want, you can both attempt. Eagle Court is coming up, and this is a building in which there'll be a minimum unit size, but no maximum unit size. Now, you know, I'm very Manhattan-oriented, so I don't know anything about the other boroughs. But I know in Manhattan, we have got these new buildings that have got 1 unit, 16 floors, and you end up with 16 units. I think that's ridiculous. So my question to you is, we all are trying to get more housing, and I think it would be much more appropriate to say there's a maximum unit size, just like there's a minimum unit size. So in one building, maybe you could have 4 floors or whatever the hell you want, but you still have to have some 1 bedrooms and some studios and something to mix it up. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm mulling it over as I speak.
As
so.
you do.
I suspect we've never before had a problem with maximum unit size. In fact, for most development, we have the opposite problem, which is that developers choose to build 40% studios, 40% ones, and we don't get family housing.
Right. But on the affordable side, but on the rich people, they always seem to have 4 bedrooms.
No, because in the affordable housing, the distribution has to mimic the distribution of the market rate, and so you're not getting in new buildings many apartments for families. It may be that in the Uber market rate apartments of Manhattan, I mean, there was an article today about landlords combining apartments to make huge apartments and evade the rent stabilization requirements.
That's going to close in Albany. Brian Kavanaugh is going to take care of that. But meanwhile, I'm just saying, this is an example. This is happening right now. I don't think you should end up with 16 apartments on 16 floors. And I think you should end up with mixing it up. And again, a lot of the people working in land use are concerned about this. It's a Manhattan issue, I assume.
And I assume a market rate Manhattan issue because
it's just not, you know, it's like not giving us anything in terms of what we need as a city, in my opinion, so.
I would have to think more about that.
Okay.
I can't give you an off-the-cuff answer of more than I did.
Can the other candidate comment on that also? Okay. Then the second question is, there's a lot of pushing to convert offices to residential. Obviously, when some of these office buildings have interior, windows on the outside, et cetera, because it's harder to convert to residential. Hotels are easier. So my question is, there are certain standards that, housing has to meet. And so I want to make sure that as we talk about this conversion, do you want to make sure that those standards are kept and we don't end up with housing that doesn't have light and air, et cetera? Because there is a lot of talk about conversion, but I don't think everybody understands what we're converting.
I absolutely agree that we need to have standards and that people who get government housing should not be subject to a lesser standard merely because we let it happen. I absolutely agree that Class A office buildings do not lend themselves to being converted for residential. For the past 20 years, we have had a commercial sector that is looking for very, very large floor plates, and so that's what gets built. Very large floor plates. Since for residential, you require windows, you only have windows on the outside of a very large floor plate. You would have huge rooms, just the issue you bring up, but not many. Living rooms, bedrooms, they all require windows, and you wouldn't be able to get any more than the exterior windows would permit. You could, and this has happened in a few developments over the years, you could cut a core out of the center so you could have some interior, but then you lose the floor space, so I'm not sure that that's a really good balance.
Okay. It's got to be looked at because we need the housing, but it has to be done correctly. My question also, just in terms of special districts, Lincoln Square Special District is in my community. We have filed an EIS trying to get to city planning, trying to contain more of the buildings where ABC's leaving to be in the special district. So the same issue with Two Bridges. This whole issue of special districts is important. So my question to you is, would you follow special districts? Would you continue trying to make sure that what they came to represent would be followed? Because obviously Lincoln Square is an example where some of it was cut out, but to the eyes of everyone, it should be part of the district. It doesn't necessarily mean the buildings are smaller, fatter, taller. You just feel that it should be within the district. So I'm just want to know if you have any positions on these special districts.
I think special districts were enacted for a variety of reasons and a variety of good reasons, and I would find them different than the Seward Park issue because that was an urban renewal area and an urban renewal plan, and that's entirely different than a special district. I think that most of the special districts have a reason for being, and it's a good reason, and so I would support them.
Okay. We have no database of air rights or zoning lot mergers, or just basically lot mergers. Would you support a database of air rights so that we would know what is being transferred, some transparency, and the same thing with lots? Because all of a sudden, 200 Amsterdam had a lot merger. We didn't know anything about it, as an example. So the whole issue of lots and air rights end up being quite challenging because you find out at the last minute about all of it.
It's an issue that is an important one because for many people. One of the ways in which developments get taller, as you know, is by merging zoning lots, giving them additional FAR that they use in one location, or by buying, which is also a zoning lot merger, by buying air rates from an adjacent property. I don't know how the buildings department lists them or whether there is something in the way in the buildings department other than looking at individual properties to find when one has happened.
Right.
As an individual, I would certainly support the idea that there should be transparency when a zoning lot is merged.
Okay. Religious properties, obviously that's where we get some of our affordable housing, we hope. So as borough president, we had a whole task force. We tried to make it clear what was or wasn't possible with religious properties. Is there some way that you would think about them, being a provider of affordable housing if they have extra space, is there something different about religious properties in terms of planning that you might consider? Is there some use that they have for our city, if they're not obviously in use?
I'm going to take a pass on that one. That one really requires more thought than I can
Okay.
kind of do right here in front of you.
And then just quickly, the West Side is the second densest neighborhood in America in terms of just density. Is there a point at which a neighborhood has reached its capacity in terms of density in your mind, or do you think we should just keep?
Well, the idea of zoning was, in fact, to control density.
Yes.
And that much of the avenues on the Upper West Side are the only places in the city zoned R10, and the ability to, residential, and the ability to get to R12 if you do certain things.
Yes.
To get to 12 FAR.
I'm quite familiar with that, yes.
So I know that the state, on the other hand, has been looking at allowing much more FAR there, but zoning was the way to control the density. Once you get built out, that's it. So I think we need to really also work with the state to try and make sure that the things that they have considered in order to build more affordable housing don't include overburdened or burdened communities with additional density that the infrastructure and other things are not prepared to handle.
All right, thank you. And I just want to say, I'm a big supporter of looking at Ward's Island. It's state and city. We could do a Ward's Island a la Welfare Island / Roosevelt Island. Something to think about. It is a place where we need Mitchell-Lama housing, we need affordable housing, no buyouts as is what's happening on Roosevelt Island, but something to consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good, Councilmember Hudson.
I just wanted to make a statement in support of the nomination of Gail Benjamin. Expertise and experience aren't always the same thing, but she has both. And I'm also really proud that she's a constituent of mine. I met her when I was actually knocking doors during my campaign last year, and we spoke extensively about city government and what it means to lead in this way. And so it would be an honor to have you as a member of the City Planning Commission. I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
And thank you. It was fun talking to you that day and the other day.
And she
But we're
made-
still
and she
claiming
made
her
it.
for Rochdale from back in the day, just saying.
Well,
Thank
you'll
you.
be happy to know my sister still lives in Rochdale.
There you go. We're going to now move to a few questions for Mr. Crowell. I'll start with the speaker.
Thank you so much. Welcome again, Mr. Crowell. Wonderful to see you today. I'm going to go to questions on 197A. In your pre-hearing responses, you wrote that once the CPC approves a 197A plan, all subsequent CPC actions should be reviewed in conjunction with the goals of that plan. Can you explain what deference should be given to a CPC plan, both in the context of public and private land use applications?
So I think that there is a very specific set of requirements in the charter as to what a 197A plan is meant to do, and it gives the City Planning Commission a responsibility to follow that plan. Some might say there are both some very strict requirements, but also some aspirational goals with that. And I believe that it is important for the City Planning Commission to be very ever cognizant of the 197A plans, although there have not been a significant number of them over time. But it's important that there be a very considered approach as to what the plans would require and how the goals of the Planning Commission will be met in light of those plans and how the plans can, the goals of the plan will be realized. I also think that there is a significant role for the agencies to be involved and collaboration and coordination between the City Planning Commission and the administrative agencies to have a greater understanding of citywide goals and how the 197A plans are being met. And I think that applies for both both types of actions.
So if the CPC decides to approve actions with a 197A plan, at what point does the 197A plan become meaningless?
I would hope that the plan is never meaningless. The plan is established by law and needs to be considered seriously. So I would like to think that it's never meaningless, and I would also like to think that there is a clear level of communication about how actions are being undertaken and why, when a plan is in place, and why there might be some sort of a difference or deviation, because over time goals and needs could change. But I do think that I would like to think that they never are rendered meaningless. That would be contrary, the antithesis of what they were meant to be.
Thank you. My final question, I'm a former chairperson of Community Board 12, the second largest in Queens. So do you think that the CPC should provide funding to community boards to promote the creation of 197A plans?
I think that as a general principle, community boards should be well-resourced to conduct a full range of functions that are part of their that are available to them by the charter, and also that are required of them by the charter. So I think that the city government needs to make adequate provision for them for a whole host of reasons, both from a planning perspective, to gain technical expertise that they need to do their work, to engage community members, to be connected to their constituencies through technology. And so I have always believed there should be ample resources for them to do their work and to conduct those activities that are either required or available to them under the charter.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. A few questions, and then I'll hand it over to members. For 20 years, we've seen vacancy decontrol, which has obviously been addressed in the recent.
Can you re-say that? I couldn't hear you. I apologize.
Sure. For decades, almost 20 years, we saw the stock of rent stabilization housing in New York City reduce significantly based on changes to state laws, including vacancy decontrol. And at the same time, the city was experiencing a building boom, and we saw, as you probably would know around us, rents skyrocketing and leaving us to an affordable housing crisis, and I would say a housing crisis, period, in this city that's worse than I think we've seen it in a long time, or if ever before. Can you describe your philosophy when it comes to striking the balance between new development and affordability? And I guess a subsequent question to that is, do you believe New York do you think it's necessary, or can we build its way out of an affordable housing crisis, or are there other mechanisms that you see available to help ensure affordability?
So I agree completely that there is a crisis. I deeply care about what has gone on in terms of the availability of affordable housing stock for many income levels who need affordable housing. The evolution and implementation of mandatory inclusionary housing has many worthy goals. Certainly, I think we should look at how that's been implemented, the history of that, and whether the right targets. I've been very concerned about the rate of inflation right now and the prices, the pandemic era coupled with inflation, certainly over the past 7 months, has been adding to the dramatic impact that we've seen for the need for housing. So my view of it is that there needs to be very careful consideration with an eye towards exercising and utilizing a broad range of tools that can promote more affordable housing development, and look at existing housing that might be able to be converted into affordable housing that is permanent. So I think it requires study and action in a very short period of time to make sure that we can crack the problem.
Thanks for that. My second question, and then I'll hand it over to members, is if you participate in the city council hearings or even CPC hearings, I think at times you see sort of a loss of confidence in the land use process that many members have, community members, I think, for sure, in terms of or frustration maybe is the better term. And, you know, one might argue there's a kind of healthy tension that ULURP creates that is designed to sort of drive towards an outcome. But I think increasingly seeing a frustration with the whole process and how it plays out. And that comes in various forms of where that frustration comes from. So, do you see improvements or modifications, or do you have ideas or thoughts on how you know, we as public servants can restore confidence to the public in terms of that process and the outcomes that it delivers?
I think there are, I appreciate that question. I think there's a broad range of problems. They are, many of them are longstanding. They have deep history tied to them. I think that first and foremost, there's a great misunderstanding about what the land use process is, at least in a number of communities, and communities are not always fully informed how to engage well and understand what's going on, or not early enough. I think that we should, in response to the speaker, I talked about the need for more funding for community boards. I think a lot of what goes on at the community board level is important for communities to engage and understand the trajectory of a process, what its foundation is and where it goes from the community board level. But I also think that restoring faith in the process requires everyone who's a stakeholder in that process to have a great deal of trust and dialogue. I think that the Planning Commission itself has a significant role in not only educating at the ground level with community boards, but every level of decision making in the process, from borough presidents to the council, and I do think that that's a significant weight on the commission itself to make sure that education, clear communication, transparency underlie everything that happens, and to build a level of trust. I think that there has been a warring factions approach to the land use process, which is unfortunate, which has gone on through successive administrations. But I think that we need a strategic approach citywide to planning, and to be able to reap the benefits that we overwhelmingly agree are needed, but it often is just not here. And so I do think that there's both community-based engagement as well as engagement among the policymakers.
Thanks. I'm going to go to members now. We have two signed up right now. We have Councilmember Hudson and Councilmember Brewer. So we'll start with Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you, and hello. My first question is, what is your direct experience with land use development and/or community-led planning?
So my direct experience is more as a city attorney in implementing plans that may have been established, including eminent domain projects and things like that, where there is a broader plan for a specific area. That would be my direct experience. And then again, and of course my education as an individual who studied urban policy and planning and then focused on the same in law school.
For cases that you worked on regarding eminent domain, was you mentioned on behalf of the city, right? So,
correct.
Using eminent domain to acquire properties?
To acquire properties and to build affordable housing and stimulate job creation.
Okay. Can you give me an example of one project? What?
Melrose Commons, Ocean Hill, Brownsville. This is back in the 90s.
Okay. I'm pausing because I want to ask this question in a respectful way, and I hope you don't take it in any other way, but I want to be direct. And some of your answers to the questions that we asked, and I also respect the fact that you're an attorney, and I know that, attorneys are very good at this, but some of your answers seem to evade the questions that we've asked. And you ask us to refer to your opening statement rather than expounding on your views or previous statements to more closely answer our questions. And I think what we're trying to get at, and certainly what I'm interested in, is just understanding what your values are. And I would say, based on what I've read about your background, I come from a similar background to you, but I don't know if we share the same values. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of what you sort of default to, and where your values are, and when it comes to something like community projects, or projects rather that are brought to communities and communities come out against them. And I'm not necessarily saying that one has to be entirely for or against said project. All of these things are very nuanced, and we often don't have the time to actually get into the nuance, and then I think that, is actually like dangerous territory, because it prevents us from having real, honest, and open conversations about balancing the many needs that we have. But I'm just trying to get a sense of like what your values are, what you default to, where your orientation lies when it comes to listening to communities of color, low-income communities, as opposed to, wealthy developers.
So I spent 15 years in city government, where I believe that I fought on behalf of everyday people every single day of my city service. In terms of my questions, which I'll then give you more about the values, in terms of my questions, my answers were really designed overwhelmingly to give you insight as to what I thought about specific issues, but also that I don't come to the role as a city planning commissioner with a predisposition towards doing something that is against community interest. I'm going to look at local interests. I do want to understand the citywide interests. That was how I operated. I believe my reputation in city government was as an honest broker, a fair dealer. People came to me to pick at thorny issues so they could, to break through. I have spent the last 10 years of my life working 7 days a week, building a program at New York Law School that turns loose on this city a group of social justice warriors, deeply passionate, committed students who are building communities here every day, who, through their work at the law school, social justice and economic opportunity is a theme. It is on the walls of the law school and facilities that I built there, and programs that I worked with my colleagues to create, including a very broad housing justice initiative that now trains lawyers to be part of the right to counsel movement, ensuring that those who are threatened by eviction have counsel they need to protect their homes, protect their families, protect their lives. Those are my values. Those have always been my values. I may have worked in different administrations, but I have always been able to be true to myself, my authentic self in every way, in every job I've ever held, and that's who I am. And I happen to be blessed to be in a position right now where I get to have such an impact on the lives of new lawyers who go out and build this city. And I'm proud to work at New York Law School because I say that those lawyers who've graduated from there historically have been the ones who have helped build New York City.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
And I'm glad you asked the question. You should ask of every single person who sits in this seat. It's a good question.
I have.
And I'm glad. That's good. I respect that you have. I'm glad you asked me. Thank you.
Yeah, and also just in the interest of full disclosure, Ms. Benjamin and I had a separate, private conversation, so that's why I didn't
It's okay.
grill
We didn't
her
get a
quite the
chance to
same way
talk.
that I've grilled you. But no, I appreciate that answer. I think that's exactly what we're trying to pull out,
Yeah.
in the written responses. But sometimes it's better in person than on paper. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you. We go to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much. I think I know you, so great answer to both of you. 25 years, you kind of get to know somebody. The question I have is, you have been in your answers and in person when I asked you before, this quagmire of affordable housing is bugging us. So the MIH was de Blasio's response. And I understand, you know better than I, that if we try to do more than a 25% in terms of affordable, the Recipe Market, that we could end up with a takings issue. Is there anything else we can do from a zoning perspective? And maybe there isn't. This might just be an HBD/HDC/other funding. Is there anything else we can do to try to increase, particularly in areas that are gentrifying or that have expensive land, for lack of a better word, to increase affordable housing using zoning? And there may not be any answer. I don't know.
There may be. What I'd like to do is I'd like to really understand and do a qualitative review of the effectiveness of mandatory inclusionary housing and better understand how it's worked, why it's either worked well or why it hasn't, where it's worked well and where it hasn't, and then try to understand what some of those zoning solutions might be, or other incentive programs that may be beyond exclusively a zoning rubric, but figure out how we can play a part in the evolution of stronger programs that can overall stimulate more affordable housing development.
All right, that is what we need more than anything else right now in this city, and nobody's doing this. So between you and Grodnick and Benjamin, I assume that we'll figure this out. The other question I have is just the religious properties question. I don't know if that's something that you have thought about, but there are a lot of them for sale. People aren't participating in religion as much, et cetera. And like I said, we did have a task force on this. Is there something, have you thought about that issue, about how these properties could in fact contribute to affordable housing, or is that something that you'd like to consider?
I would say that I'd like to understand a little bit more about the current stock that might be available and what plans are for them by the religious entities that own them. I think that there should be nothing that's off the table in terms of review, but religious properties have there is a greater sensitivity to them as a result of their ownership and use. So I'd like to understand that more, but I have seen examples in this city where churches have been sold and turned into market rate housing. Yes. But that doesn't necessarily mean they couldn't be turned into something other than market rate housing. Okay. But I'd like to understand a little more fully some of the considerations that went into those projects and others, and what the range of possibilities could be as we see more religious facilities coming on the market.
And then something else that needs thought. Corey Johnson tried to do a master plan. It didn't work, and I think there were many challenges to what was proposed. The concept, like many other concepts, is a good one. We should be planning for the city. So would you have some way to think about that, or is that something that you have thought about or not, this master plan issue? How do you think it should be approached, if at all?
Well, I think that there should be a strategic plan. I think that we need to understand what the needs are citywide. I think that there should be a strategic set of priorities and a strategic plan that sets forth with specific goals and targets, and we should pursue it that way. A master plan is fine. Master plans, however, I don't necessarily like the terminology first and foremost, but I also think that something can be lost in a master plan, and we need to really focus on what the strategic priorities are and understand how to meet both local needs and citywide needs through directed strategies.
Thank you.
Thank you. See any other questions? So I want to thank both candidates for joining us today and providing your testimonies and questions. And with that, we'll excuse you both and call up the next nominee. Thanks. Our next nomination is for appointment to the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board. And the Conflicts of Interest Board is the entity that serves to provide clear guidance to public employees regarding the conflict of interest laws codified in Chapter 68 of the New York City Charter. The board is tasked with achieving this goal through training, education, and issuance and publication of advisory opinions relating to conduct that may violate the city's conflicts of interest law. The board also adopts rules to implement and interpret the provisions of the conflict of interest laws. It reviews and makes decisions on alleged conflict violations and has the power to impose penalties, including fines of up to $25,000 per violation and suspension or dismissal of city employees when deemed appropriate. The board also collects and reviews financial disclosure reports. The board consists of 5 members who are appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the city council. The mayor must also designate one of these members as chair of the board. The charter states that these members should be chosen for their independence, integrity, civic commitment, and high ethical standards. Board members serve for staggered 6-year terms and are prohibited from serving more than 2 consecutive 6-year terms. Board members are required to meet at least once per month and are prohibited from holding public office, seeking election to any public office, being a public employee in a jurisdiction, holding political party office, or appearing as a lobbyist before the city. Board members are entitled to receive compensation in the amount of $250 for each day that they calendar day that they perform work for the board, and the chair is entitled to receive $275 for each day of service. Today we're joined by Milton Williams, who's been nominated by the mayor for appointment to the Conflicts of Interest Board. Welcome. If the council grants its advice and consent, Mr. Williams will be appointed to serve out the remainder of a 6-year term expiring on March 31st, 2024. That was vacated by a certain Anthony Crowell. Welcome, Mr. Williams, and thank you for being here today. If you will, please raise your right hand to be sworn in.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and answer to all committee member questions? I do.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience as well. With that, you are recognized if you'd like to give an opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Powers, Speaker Adams, and distinguished members of the City Council. It is an honor to be here today. I'm very much looking forward to serving as a member of the Conflicts of Interest Board. In this role, I will be fair and impartial and work closely with my fellow board members to achieve fair and equitable outcomes and protect the integrity of city government. My background as a former prosecutor and defense attorney and my prior roles in public service have given me the experience to serve as a member of COIB with efficacy and efficiency. I'm a product of New York City, raised in 4 of the 5 boroughs. I must tell you, I did not know that there was going to be a Rochdale Village connection here today, because I grew up in Rochdale Village in the late '60s and went to the World's Fair when it was out there. And also, my grandmother moved in after we left and moved back to the Bronx. And she lived in Rochdale Village to the late '90s, so I was always out there. I had cousins in South Ozone Park, and there were places like the Lost Battalion in Baisley Park that I spent a lot of time in. But anyway, I attended Catholic school for 12 years. I left to attend Amherst College and the University of Michigan Law School, but my love for our great city pulled me back home. After law school, I worked as an assistant district attorney in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I then joined the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York as a federal prosecutor. The last unit I was in was the Securities and Commodities Fraud Task Force. From there, I moved into private practice and have been a young associate at various firms and also a partner at nationally recognized firms where I handled white collar. I also litigated employment discrimination, restrictive covenant cases, Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley retaliation claims, as well as litigated in front of the Securities Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service, doing both regular kind of representation work and whistleblower claims. I was in-house at Time Inc. for many years, and I became Deputy General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer there. While at Time Inc., my responsibilities included internal investigations, compliance, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, and Sarbanes-Oxley, as well as intellectual property, privacy, data security, and other innovative areas. I also litigated a variety of employment law matters on behalf of the company concerning race, age, disability, and gender discrimination, restrictive covenants, and independent contractor litigation. From time I re-entered private practice, and I'm currently a partner at Walden, Mock, and Horan, where I do more or less white-collar criminal employment law, complex commercial litigation, and regulatory because of my compliance background. My commitment to public service is unwavering. I have served in leadership positions in many aspects of public service, including as co-chair of the Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption, a board member for the New York City Public School System, and a member for the Panel for Educational Policy, First Department's Attorney Disciplinary Committee, Judiciary and Nominating Committees for the Association of the Bar of the City of New York. Civil Litigation Committee for the Eastern District of New York, Prisoners Legal Services of New York, and the New York City Board of Correction. And there are some other things that aren't mentioned here. But you get the idea. I've been involved in the community. It would be an honor to continue serving the City of New York as chair of the Conflicts of Interest Board. Thank you for your time and attention, and I welcome any questions you have.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. And once again, thanks for your patience. We'll go to questions from the speaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Williams, welcome. I'm so glad to, as Ms. Benjamin just whispered in my ear, so happy to populate New York City with Rochdale Village dwellers. So, anytime we can bring my district into the forefront, it's always a good thing. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for your testimony this morning, and congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
You are on so many boards and organizations that do business with the city, which could, at minimum, create the appearance of conflicts of interest. So if appointed, do you plan to remain on all of the boards that you currently?
No, there are 8 I'm coming off of. There are a couple of boards that I've been there forever on. And so I was very active at one time, and then I stayed on them because I was asked, and they kind of rolled me out when kind of thorny issues come. But I haven't been involved. But there are a total of 8, and there are 3 that I'm currently on that I'm currently very active in that I know do business with the city that I'll be coming off of.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to get that out on the record.
Sure.
Your biography indicates that you have a significant amount of experience with legal ethics as a member of bar oversight boards, and that you also have experience investigating public corruption under state law. What is your experience and expertise with respect to New York's conflicts of interest law and COIB's practices and decisions?
So I'm new to COIB. I haven't had much dealings with them in my private practice. I've had a few matters with or one in particular I'm thinking of with the Department of Investigation. I don't think that involved COIB, but so I'm new to this, and I'm going to, rely on staff and rely on my ability to get up to speed. But so I've had extensive experience in related areas, but I have not had any specific dealings with COIB or the City Conflicts of Interest Board laws in my past experience.
Okay. I want to get this on the record also in your pre-hearing questions. You were co-chair of the Moreland Commission, huge, which was charged with finding violations of the New York State campaign finance law and recommending changes to state campaign finance and ethic laws. What were the biggest challenges for you that confronted you in that role in particular?
Well, so let me say something. My experience in the Moreland Commission was very interesting, and it was very dynamic the entire 9 months. I feel good about where we ended up because we issued a report that I thought was very compelling and independent. The biggest challenge with the Moreland Commission was the fact that, unfortunately, there was I don't know any other way to put it, there was someone in the commission, I don't know whether it was one of the commissioners or one of the staff, who was leaking information in real time to the press. So the reporter I remember who had the best sources or seemed to write stories like 2 seconds after the meetings ended was a gentleman by the name of Ken Lovett of the Daily News. And so the biggest challenge of the Moreland Commission was that after about a month, there was a complete lack of a free flow of dialogue between the commissioners because everyone was so concerned about whatever they said, was going to get out. And there was no chance to exchange ideas, convince one another, maybe we should do something differently. As soon as you said something, it was out in a certain way. And that was a huge challenge and a huge issue during my tenure on the Moreland Commission.
That's pretty significant. I'm going to skip to this one, and then I'm going to give it back over to the chair. Do you believe that the board has a duty to show deference to the policy goals and decisions of the mayoral administration? And if appointed to the board, what would your position be on handling alleged conflicts of interest violations by the mayor?
Well, so it doesn't matter who it is. If there's an allegation, it will be reviewed, to use, throw in a legal term, de novo. we will look at it, on its face, on the merits. It doesn't matter who necessarily is involved at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Just a short question or two here. You mentioned some of your, we mentioned some of the boards you're on, and also your experience with COIB. In your capacity, I think you referenced this. In your capacity as a lawyer, you've represented a whistleblower and made allegations against the Commissioner of the Department of Investigation for improper behavior. As a member of COIB, would you represent any public employees in their claims against the city? And would your firm represent any public employees before COIB? And if so, what measures would you take to resolve any perceived or actual conflicts of interest?
So me personally, if I am in this position, during my tenure in this position, I will not be representing anybody who has any matters before COIB, nor any matters against New York City. So that's first of all. As to my firm, no, they won't be involved with anybody who represents an individual in front of COIB. As far as we don't have like an extensive litigation practice against the city, but I mean, my firm might handle something, that involves the city. If I'm in this position, it could even be contrary to the city, but I'll be walled off for it and have no involvement in it.
And when you say your firm would not represent, what are the measures that we might, I suppose, what gives us assurances or guarantees that wouldn't happen?
Well, because we run conflicts checks. Anytime we get a new matter that comes in the firm, we have to list it and run it past the whole firm to make sure there are no conflicts of interest. We may represent a company here, and then an individual will come in and want to bring a suit against them, but we have an existing representation of the company, so then we can't, take on the individual. So I'll know immediately, and then I would say, "Ooh, we can't do this." It happened. That kind of practice, has existed in our firm and every other firm I've been in.
Okay. I'm going to go to members for questions. We have Councilmember Brewer and then Councilmember Hudson.
Very quickly, it was good to talk to you when we spoke earlier. I think that the members of the municipal workforce still need to know more about what they should or shouldn't do. I know there is some kind of training. Do you have any suggestions based on your very extensive background working in places where there is corruption or where there are challenges for either just New Yorkers or workforce, about how more education could be given so that, somebody doesn't steal, as they often do, I'm afraid, or I make mistakes that are obvious. Now, we get trained, but it doesn't seem to stop some of this. I didn't know if you had any ideas about what COIB could do.
So, there could never be too much education and training. I'd have to take a look, and I'd have to be involved in COIB to know more and work with the staff. And I'm always open to talk to anyone about suggestions that they think, or methods that they think would improve the system. What I will tell you is this. I think most individuals, having worked in companies and having done compliance, there is always some individuals who will push the envelope, no matter how much education and training they get. I think you're referring to the people who accidentally hit the tripwire. And so for that, as much education and training as possible, and encouraging them, if they have a question, do anonymously or in a confidential basis, they could reach out and ask the question and kind of get a preview as to what, people think about the particular circumstance.
Thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you. I want to follow up on the speaker's question regarding, how I want to ask specifically. She asked what your position would be on handling alleged conflicts of interest violations by the mayor. But I want to ask you, how would you address an alleged conflict of interest violation of the mayor or members of the city council? You're being recommended by the mayor but approved by the city council, so really it's, more or less one and the same as far as I'm concerned. So I just want you to go maybe a little bit deeper into how you would actually address an alleged conflict, because it's one thing, everybody comes before us and says, I'm going to be fair and impartial, and of course, but the reality is that you're being appointed by the mayor. So,
No, certainly. I think it would be handled like any other review or investigation. An allegation would come in, the staff would look at it, the staff would take an initial cut, and they would have to evaluate whatever evidence existed as to whether or not there was a conflict of interest. And then it would come, as I understand it, and this is the general process in other places I've been, it would come to the board. The board would have to take a look at it, and the board would carefully evaluate whether or not the evidence supports the allegation, whether or not there are other explanations for what happened, whether or not there are mitigating circumstances. So that is kind of the general process. The same way if I was a prosecutor and there was a case that came in, I'd have to carefully look at it before I thought whether or not charges were warranted. So it would be the same process. And again, as I said to the I think the speaker, it doesn't matter who the allegation's against. It will be taken seriously and evaluated the same way each time.
I hope so. Thank you. And then my second, just a quick question is, have you been empowered to act autonomously and without, any influence from the mayor, any folks at the administration, and also from us on the council side?
You mean in connection with this nomination?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I have not been. There's nobody that has reached out to me to influence me one way or the other. And you don't know me well enough, but that would have the exact opposite effect.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see other questions, so we'll thank you for being here today, and congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We are going to now move to, we have two more nominees. We're going to move now to the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which we will call up Sarah Carroll. Pursuant to Section 3020 of the City Charter, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, also known as the LPC, is responsible for establishing and regulating landmarks, portions of landmarks, landmark sites, interior landmarks, scenic landmarks, and historic districts. The LPC also regulates alterations to designated buildings. The LPC consists of 11 members. Membership must include at least 3 architects, 1 historian qualified in the field, 1 city planner or landscape architect, and 1 realtor, and must include at least 1 resident from each of the 5 boroughs. Members serve for terms of 3 years and serve until the appointment of a successor. The mayor also designates 1 of the LPC members to serve as the chair of the LPC and designates another member to serve as the vice chair of the LPC. These LPC members shall serve until a successor is designated. The members of the LPC, with the exception of the chair, serve without compensation but are reimbursed for necessary expenses incurred in the course of performing their duties. The chair's current salary is $223,319. Today we're joined by Sarah Carroll, the current LPC chair, who has been nominated by the mayor for reappointment as the LPC chair. If reappointed, Ms. Carroll, a resident of the Borough of Queens, will serve the remainder of a 3-year term that expires on June 28th, 2025. Thank you for being here today. Nice to see you, and congratulations on your renomination. We'll have you raise your right hand to be sworn in, and then we'll take testimony from you.
Thank you. You affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before the committee and answer to all council member questions.
I do.
Thank you. You are recognized to give an opening statement.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Speaker Adams, Chair Powers, and members of the committee for this opportunity to testify before you. As a preservationist by training and profession, and as a lifelong New Yorker who has devoted my career to the mission of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, I cannot think of a greater honor than to be considered as Mayor Eric Adams' nominee to chair the Landmarks Preservation Commission, the largest and most sophisticated preservation commission in the country. If confirmed, I look forward to partnering with this council, preservationists, property owners, and all interested parties in recognizing, protecting, and celebrating the architecturally, culturally, and historically significant buildings and sites in our city. I was appointed chair in 2018 and have had the privilege these last 4 years to lead an agency with such an important mission and work with such an incredibly talented staff. We have also faced many unprecedented challenges during this time, including the COVID-19 pandemic that changed the way we interact with our city. I'm very proud of the agency's resiliency during this time and the staff's commitment to fulfilling the agency's mandate. While these events created challenges, we found opportunities to reinvent and reimagine our work in ways that will be long-lasting. Throughout the pandemic, LPC pivoted to accommodate new ways of issuing permits quickly, transitioning from a paper-based process to a simplified e-filing application process. And we continue to designate sites that reflect the diversity of the city. Recognizing the importance of our businesses to the city's recovery, we launched the Business Recovery Initiative in the summer of 2020, and we expanded that initiative this past summer to create the LPC Business Express service and streamline the permit process for business owners. We have also increased our outreach methods and continued to make the work of the agency more transparent, creating digital tools and story maps to thematically connect the public with our landmarks and to make information on them more accessible to all. As chair, one of my primary goals is to incorporate equity and diversity into all aspects of the agency's work. In January 2021, LPC launched an equity framework to ensure diversity and inclusion in designation, with a particular focus on preserving historic places associated with underrepresented communities. Robust outreach and public dialogue with the city's diverse communities, and fairness, transparency, and efficiency in regulation so that all property owners have equal access to resources, technical assistance, and expertise. This framework has guided the agency's work, and using it, we have prioritized and designated sites that represent the diversity of the city. Among the designations are the East 25th Street Historic District, the first in East Flatbush, the Dorrance Brooks Square Historic District, which is New York City's first historic district named after an African American and has strong associations with notable figures in the Harlem Renaissance, the Holyrood Episcopal Church, Iglesia Santa Cruz, in Washington Heights, with important associations to the Latino community, the Educational Building at 75th Avenue, which was the first national office of the NAACP, Kim Lau War Memorial in Chinatown, the first landmark that specifically recognizes Chinese American history and culture, and the Akawahang Manahanang Archaeological Site, the first New York City landmark specifically recognizing the many generations of indigenous peoples who have lived here. I believe I bring a unique blend of expertise and experience to the position of chair. I've worked at the commission for more than 25 years, including 9.5 years as director of the Preservation Department, 4 years as executive director, and the last 4 years as chair. I am intimately knowledgeable about the entire range of activities from research, designation, enforcement, and preservation. I have engaged with property owners, large and small, and understand the challenges they all have in navigating the Commission's regulatory processes. I'm very proud of all of the efficiencies that have been implemented during my time in policy-making positions, including a more efficient, rigorous, and transparent designation and regulatory processes, restructuring the designation process to ensure more research and outreach is done before properties are calendared, and making organizational changes to the designation reports, reducing the timeline for designation, and developing digital tools to connect all New Yorkers with our landmarks and our processes. And we are currently working hard to implement a permanent e-filing system with a robust public-facing web portal. I am mindful of the critical role that LPC plays in maintaining the vibrancy of the city. We must identify and designate important places that reflect the city's history and preserve them. We must also allow appropriate change and development. We must ensure that designated buildings and districts accommodate the pressing social needs facing our great city, from renewing the economy, facilitating renewable energy and adapting to climate change, and increasing housing. Buildings have never been frozen in time, but always adapted to contemporary needs and challenges. The New York City's Landmarks Law recognizes this and empowers the Commission with the needed discretion to approve sensitive and appropriate change. And we must partner with a diverse range of stakeholders, from property owners to communities and elected officials, as we move forward and consider how preservation intersects with these pressing issues that face our city and cities across the nation. I hope to work in collaboration with your offices on this exciting, interesting, and challenging work. I believe my unique blend of expertise, experience, and temperament will allow me to successfully lead the agency through these goals. New York City's landmarks and historic neighborhoods help make the city a global destination, attracting residents, tourists, and businesses. And they play a vital role in the dynamism of and the economy of the city. If confirmed, I will work to continue to preserve and protect sites that reflect the diversity and history of our city throughout the 5 boroughs and ensure that they remain relevant for generations to come. I ask for your support in this confirmation process and welcome any questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and your testimony. I'll now hand it over to Speaker to kick us off for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you.
Congratulations on your nomination for reappointment.
Thank you.
I think the 3 of us are together again.
I know.
So we're in a good space. You know, as the former council chair for the Landmarks Committee, it was really, really important for me to bring to the Commission's attention the lack of diversity and attention that the city has paid historically in communities of color, in bringing certain aspects of the city out, because this truly is our beautiful mosaic, and I thank you for carrying that message and continuing to carry that message as the leader of the Commission. I commend you for that. There is still a perception, though, in some quarters that historic preservation is dominated by wealthy elites. What do you believe accounts for such perceptions, and what can you do as chair to dissipate such perceptions and ensure that that's not the reality?
I can't say what accounts for that perception. I think, you know, there are different thought processes from all avenues and many stakeholders. But what I can say in terms of what we can do is continue to survey, research, and designate sites that reflect underrepresented communities, both geographic and cultural communities. And also, another priority of mine has been to really hit the ground with outreach. And we started to do a lot of it before the pandemic in various communities. Communities that were not designated, to raise awareness about the history of the neighborhood and try to talk about the benefits and responsibilities of designation, but also areas that are already designated, and to really meet people in their communities. The pandemic changed the nature of that, but we quickly pivoted to virtual meetings. And we've had very successful meetings in communities. We're in Adderley Park pretty routinely. We recently were in Bedford as well. But we've also done many citywide virtual meetings, and those have been both presentations on the benefits and financial incentives available to designated properties, as well as office hours for people who have specific questions and want to speak one-on-one with somebody, and we have a format set up for that. So I think it's a combination of continuing to prioritize our survey, our research work, and our designations in these communities, as well as being available, accessible, and continuing our educational and outreach programs to raise awareness.
Thank you. I just have one more question for you. You indicated in your pre-hearing responses and also just now in your opening remarks that the most important initiative you're engaged in is the diversification of designations to greater reflect the diverse histories of people who've lived in New York City. So how important is staff diversity to you and to those efforts, and what diversification efforts have you implemented?
It is very important, and we are always striving for more diversity, both within the agency, but frankly within the field of historic preservation as well. And so we, obviously, we try to recruit, and we post in we post positions in numerous sites that can try to attract a more diverse pool of applicants. But even within the agency, it's been important to me to create a culture that is comfortable for everyone. And so we, in recent years, started a number of working groups, employee working groups and employee resource groups that allow for communities of employees to come together and collectively share their experiences. And we have two employee working groups that are specifically working on diversity. One is working on diversity within how we can increase diversity within the agency and within the field, and they're doing studies, and they're looking at other agencies and cities across the nation, and looking at other agencies within the city and making recommendations. And then we have another employee working group that we've tasked with thinking about sensitive and inclusive language, so that as we draft reports, we are being sensitive. The language evolves, and we want to make sure that we are using the most appropriate sensitive language, and we are being as inclusive as possible in our research and our outreach.
Thank you. I'll just conclude my questions just by stating again, just very encouraging to see your outreach into more communities of color. I'm just going to continue to encourage you to keep that going, specifically, in Queens, in my district, and across Southeast Queens in particular. We still have a lot of work to do. We did a school a couple of years ago that had gotten no attention, and I was just so proud of that. It brought a lot of pride to the community to landmark that school. It is not the only place in the city in a community of color that needs to have that attention and to be landmarked and celebrated in the world of landmarking. So I'm just going to encourage you to just keep on doing that. Keep looking, reach out to my colleagues on the council. This is the most diverse council ever, so we've got a lot of spaces for you to work with, to learn from, and to expand into those communities of color that do deserve landmarking.
That's great, and we have been doing a lot of survey work, as you know, during the sort of pandemic and the transition and administrations slowed down some of our public-facing work. We've been doing a lot of survey work, and those surveys serve as planning tools and create an inventory from which we can prioritize designations. And as a Queens resident myself, we've focused on Queens, the result of which is 2 recently designated districts in Cambria Heights, and those will be coming to the council later in September, so I'm very excited about those. We've also dedicated half of our research team this past summer to do a full survey in the Bronx, council district by council district, and I'm very excited about the results and the resources we've identified there. So I look forward to partnering with all council members and looking at opportunities in their districts.
Wonderful. Thank you again for your service. Thank you for your commitment, and it's great seeing you.
Great seeing you. Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm going to forego my questions and just make a statement, which is that we've had a good opportunity to work together. I obviously have a lot of landmarks in my district and have appreciated the ability to work together on those items. And I know sometimes I'm here, you're there, but we've always found a way to work together, and I've appreciated the communication and the sort of willingness to kind of listen to issues that have come up in my community. So for that, I am grateful, and I don't have any questions because I've had the opportunity to work with you. I'm going to go to colleague questions, and we're going to start with Councilmember Osei.
Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Carroll. First question is, how long have you been on the commission for?
I have served as a chair and commissioner for 4 years.
Okay. And are you aware?
I've served in other roles prior to that.
And are you aware of the address 441 Willoughby in Bed-Stuy?
Yes, I am.
So in your own words, how would you describe the atrocity that took place there in terms of the demolition of this historic building within the district, that LPC took too long to make a decision in landmarking when there was a widespread amount of support district-wide by the state senator, the state assembly member, the city council member, block associations, community leaders. Why did LPC take longer than 40 days to make a decision in landmarking this historic building?
Okay, so first I will say that was a very personal and professional, real setback for me, and it hit me hard, it hit my staff hard. They worked incredibly diligently and rigorously on this. I think that we moved very quickly. The day that we learned that you would support the designation, we calendared it that very day, knowing that there was this pending application and there was some risk. And we dedicated several researchers to work on the research so that we could move it along quickly and have a hearing in a timely manner. Under the law, we have to designate an individual landmark within a year. We calendared it and had a hearing within the next month. And we heard testimony from the United chapter of the Eastern Star, and we also heard testimony from the developer. And we had information from the Department of Buildings on the timing of the application that was pending at DOB. And the issue with the 40 days is the calendaring of a property does not trigger a 40-day calendar. What triggers the 40-day clock is the time that an application is complete at the Department of Buildings. Then the Department of Buildings, if the property is calendared, will hold the application for the maximum of their maximum statutory time frame, which is 40 days. So this is all within a DOB process when it comes to a calendared building. And we were communicating with the Department of Buildings, and because of a technological glitch, the information on the fact that the application was complete and that clock had started was not available to us. And so as we heard testimony from the owners and the developer, and in my concern to ensure that the designation would be successful in the event of the inevitable lawsuit after designation, we relied on that information from the Department of Buildings and believed we had more time to consider that testimony and bring it back for a vote. And when we discovered the error, I think everybody stepped back. It took multiple agencies working together to try to understand what had happened. I think we didn't want to comment right away until we understood. It was a real shock and surprise to us, and a real, as I said, it was a very, very disappointing and situation for the community as well as for my team and for myself.
Can you expand on this technological glitch? This is something that many of my constituents are concerned about. It doesn't really make sense. We continue to see that term both in the Wall Street Journal, and again, this is a very enthusiastic community that I represent, and I would just love to hear you expand on this technological glitch.
So again, what happens is if a property is calendared and the Department of Buildings has a pending application, at the time that that application becomes complete, they will hold it for 40 days. And so the technological glitch was within their database. They didn't have the information that the applicant had come in and completed the application. So we did not know that the application was complete, and we did not know that the 40 days had started.
Has this ever happened before in the past?
Not that I am aware of. And I think this is, and I will say that, I don't think it's happened before. I think this was a very unusual circumstance. I think it helped us to, as we did a deep dive, both agencies, other staff from City Hall and our deputy mayors, to really figure out what happened and what we can do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And we have, working with our colleagues at the Department of Buildings, developed a short-term plan to ensure that it never happens with a longer-term plan that would be folded into their database upgrade that would ensure real-time information to be shared.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We get Councilmember Brewer, and then we'll do Councilmember Ressler.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of your service. I have a question about cultural versus landmarks. As you know, I am a strong preservationist, and I know that particularly in parts of Manhattan, you say no more landmarks specifically, but you might still do cultural. And so I want to know what exactly is cultural. It's a little murky. Can you clarify what you mean by that? Because, of course, I want to do everything I can to have as many preservation efforts as possible. They always laugh and say I would preserve the whole city if I could, and I probably would. And I understand that's controversial. But can you explain what you mean by cultural and clarify that?
Yeah, and I think, but just to start, I don't think that I've ever said no more landmarks in Manhattan. And in fact, under my tenure, we have designated in Manhattan. And but then to just also get to the term cultural, I think we have been very interested in designating sites that have cultural significance. Most sites have multiple layers of significance. That can be multiple layers of cultural significance along with architectural significance and historic significance. It doesn't necessarily mean that architectural significance doesn't matter, but what it means is that when we look at architecture, we want to make sure that we are doing the research and collecting the history to ensure that we are telling the full story and full history and full significance associated with that property. There is no term cultural landmark. We designate individual landmarks, historic districts, scenic landmarks, and interior landmarks. But within the individual landmark grouping, we are looking for properties that are either architecturally, culturally, or historically significant. And as I said, usually there are multiple layers, and we just want to make sure that we are telling the full story and researching all of those layers.
Okay. I just like you and many of us, we have great respect for the NYCHA buildings. I think there are a couple certainly first down in Lower East Side, and I think something in Brooklyn. We would love Amsterdam houses, of course, to be one of your, we're not doing too many more landmarks, but we still want to do Amsterdam houses on the Upper West Side. So has the issue of NYCHA come up? Does that get discussed? Is that something that we think about? I would love to see more preservation of some of these.
Yeah.
They're campuses, they're amazing. So I'd like to hear more about NYCHA.
Yeah, well, we have, we haven't specifically thought about a survey of just NYCHA houses, but we have certainly looked and started to think about housing complexes in general and their historic importance, and so I can't speak to specifically looking at NYCHA houses, but we are starting to sort of thematically look at this context, and I'd be happy to talk to you further about Amsterdam houses.
All right, and then just finally, I'm not going to talk about my favorite topic, which is West Park Presbyterian Church. As you know, we're waiting for, hopefully, no tearing down. But I do want to say, when I was borough president, we had a lot of discussion about religious in general, and they are, abandoned in terms of their congregations. So I guess my question is, and you have limited funding. Peg Breen has some funding, you have a little funding, but we also have separation of church and state. So is that something that you're, as a commission or as a leader, you think more about? Because I think it's going to come up more and more. And there's no easy solution. So I just was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you and I both know we've had a lot of experience with struggling congregations and lack of resources, and usually buildings that are very expensive and difficult to maintain. They're complex architecturally, usually. And more importantly, they also are generally anchors of a community and important to a community, if not for their original use, but also for their architecture. And so it's a real challenge, and I think we have to think about it. We try to be very rigorous when we think about which churches or other religious properties should be designated, and we're very rigorous in the analysis of merit, because they're all great anchors in their community, as I said. And so do they really rise to the level of an individual landmark? And then if so, we work very closely with religious houses of worship to ensure that they can thrive in those buildings. And then unfortunately, sometimes they don't, the congregations dwindle, and then adaptive reuse is a very important tool, and we have approved converting houses of worship into housing as well as other things, other uses. But it is, I agree with you, it's a challenge. It's a challenge we've known about for a while, and I appreciate all of the work that you've done to try to tackle it, and we're going to continue to think about it as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and now go to Councilmember Ressler.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. Appreciate the opportunity to see you today and your many years of dedicated service to the LPC. We have 7 historic districts in the 33rd, which we're very proud of. And the thing that I found most frustrating of late is when there is graffiti, degradation, just full on, ignoring of the landmarks laws. There seems to be no accountability. And the issue that comes to mind most immediately is the Greenpoint Savings Bank, where we've had graffiti atop it for well over a year. And, staff will email the developer, and there's just nothing that happens. And it's, a mind-numbingly slow process to get any response or results. And even when your staff is engaging with us via email, we're just not seeing any traction. And so what do we need to change legislatively to give some teeth to the landmark law so that we can hold truly bad actors accountable?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think we have a system that I think works very well. We have an enforcement process that begins with a warning letter, and then if the warning letter is not addressed, the action can be upgraded to a summons, which requires an appearance in oath. And then there is another opportunity for an owner to say they will correct the problem at that point without accruing a fine. And then if they don't, they can go to oath. We can issue a second summons. They go to oath a second time, at which point they will get fines. And
just to pause you for a second on that process, how long do you think it would take from the time my office contacts your office to get a letter to the developer or the owner of the landlord?
I do know that we've already issued warning letters to the owner.
You have?
Yeah.
And there's been, the only times I get any responses when I find the guy's phone number and call them myself, because they're just totally ignoring it. And my point is to get from the warning letter to the oath hearing, to the request to appear at oath, to the second approach, before there's finally a fine, we're probably talking about a year of them ignoring us. And before they might face a financial penalty. That doesn't feel like a process that's working to me.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is that generally it does work, and generally we do see results from this process. In the case of, severe neglect, we of course can issue a chair's order or an order to a violation for failure to maintain, and that is a much more significant violation. That's usually for properties that are vulnerable to, hazardous conditions because they are open to the elements. They don't have their roof, they haven't been repointed, so it's really for much more severe neglect. And then, of course, we can also bring demolition by neglect lawsuits against really bad actors who are not caring for their landmarks. In the case of this particular instance with the graffiti, I think that the issue was that the scaffolding on the new building the building work that was happening next door was allowing access, and the owner didn't want to remove it and then have it happen again and then have this repeated cycle. I understand that the scaffolding is down now, and this is our opportunity to really put pressure on the owner to say, now you don't have an excuse and you really must address this. And so we're working hard on it, and I'll continue to work with you on this.
I appreciate it. I'd be very interested in reviewing data from your staff on compliance and seeing if the warning letters and the system is actually working well, because I have serious concerns and reservations based on what we've experienced on the ground in the 33rd that it's not. And so I'm very open to being persuaded otherwise, but I think I'd like to get some additional information to.
Okay, we can definitely continue to talk about that.
And we've also had a number of issues of within historic districts, banners for for-profit companies being posted, on street lamps, which I think is really a DOT purview, and they've been semi-responsive, but we have not gotten the most constructive responses from LPC, where I would have thought you guys would have been very helpful partners in nudging DOT to do the right thing. So just wanted to flag that one as well.
Okay, yeah. I know that we have reached out to our colleagues at DOT about this very issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no reason that in historic districts we should have banners up for private entities. I mean, we shouldn't have them for private entities anywhere, frankly, for for-profit entities. But appreciate your attention on this and appreciate your work. I think it is always a good thing when somebody comes up the ranks of an agency, knows the place inside and out, and is now serving in a position of leadership, and look forward to continuing to work together.
Great, thank you. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. I don't think we have any other questions, so thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Of course. And we will now move on to our last nominee. Thank you for waiting and your patience. A long hearing. We are going to call Elisa Velasquez, nominee to the Taxi and Limousine Commission, for being here. Just give me 1 second. And then we're going to go to public testimony after that. Thank you for being here today. The New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, known as the TLC, was created pursuant to Local Law 12 of 1971. Chapter 65 of the New York City Charter establishes the TLC with the purpose of the continuance, development, and improvement of taxi and limousine service in NYC. It's the purpose of the Commission to establish an overall public transportation policy governing taxi, coach, limousine, wheelchair accessible van services, and commuter van services as it relates to the overall public transportation network of the city. The Commission establishes certain rates, standards of service, insurance, and minimum coverage, and criteria for the licensing of vehicles, drivers, chauffeurs, owners, and operators. The Commission consists of 9 members appointed by the mayor. Guys, can you just keep it down, please? Thanks. The Commission consists of 9 members appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the council. 5 of the members, 1 from each borough, must be recommended for appointment by the respective borough delegations of the City Council. TLC members are each appointed for a term of 7 years and serve until the appointment and qualification of a successor. The mayor designates 1 TLC member to act as the chair and chief executive officer. The chair has the power to employ, assign, and oversee officers and employees of the organization. Pursuant to the charter, the chair's position is full-time, and the mayor sets compensation. Members other than the chair serve without compensation. Today we're joined by Elisa Vasquez, who's been nominated by the mayor for appointment to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. If the council grants its advice and consent, she'll be appointed to serve out the remainder of a 7-year term expiring on January 31st, 2026. Welcome to you. Congratulations on your nomination, and thank you again for being patient and being with us today. If you will, please raise your right hand to be sworn in.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and in answer to all council member questions?
I will.
Thank you. You are recognized to give an opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Powers, Councilmember Brewer, and members of the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. My name is Elisa Velasquez, and I come before you today seeking your confirmation and consent to be appointed as a member of the Taxi and Limousine Commission, also known as the TLC. Thank you in advance for your consideration and for the opportunity to tell you about myself and why I would like to serve on the TLC. Currently, I am the Deputy Commissioner and Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, a position to which I was recently promoted. In that role, I will continue to oversee the agency Chief Contracting Office and will now oversee expense and miscellaneous revenue budget, facilities maintenance and construction, and executive support and administration. I joined DEP in 2016, and prior to my new role, I was the agency Chief Contracting Officer and Assistant Commissioner for Fiscal, where my duties included coordinating and executing the procurement and fiscal operations of the agency, totaling approximately $2 billion in expense and capital contracts and $1.5 billion in payments per fiscal year. Prior to DEP, I was counsel to Queensborough President Melinda Katz from January 2014 until I joined DEP in 2016. My duties as counsel were to advise the borough president and staff on various legal and policy issues, including conflicts of interest, land use, community board issues, compliance and budget issues, and corporate governance. I also acted as the borough president's representative on NYSERS, the Franchise Concession and Review Committee, and the Queens Public Library Board of Trustees. Before serving as counsel to the borough president, I was general counsel in the Mayor's Office of Contract Services from 2003 until 2013, where I advised the City Chief Procurement Officer, the City Chief Procurement Officer and staff, as well as agency contracting staff, on various aspects of procurement law, while supervising the implementation of various legislative and policy reforms by attorneys in such areas as MWBE participation, environmentally preferable purchasing, and pay-to-play laws. Prior to Mox, I had extensive government experience working for former public advocate Mark Green as deputy counsel and Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messenger as assistant counsel and director of constituent services. I am a Queens native, born in Flushing. I grew up in Manhattan and Staten Island, and I went to both college and law school, New York Law School, in New York City. I am currently a proud Belrose resident and have resided there for almost 20 years. I have two wonderful sons, one of who is a music teacher and the other who is a junior in high school. Throughout my career, which has spanned over 25 years, I've learned a lot about the huge behemoth that is city government bureaucracy, how to navigate it, manage it, and use it to advance goals and initiatives. Finding the flexibility in the joints of government and learning how to leverage it is one of my many skills that I've developed. I work hard to pass that along to all my staff and colleagues, as it is, in my mind, one of the essential ingredients to success in city government. Problem solving as a city government employee is challenging. There is never just one angle or a facet to a problem. Problems come in layers, and to really understand what the problem is, you must peel back each layer so that the solution reached is comprehensive and addresses most of the facets of the problem and is implementable without many unintended consequences. Solving problems in city government also takes collaboration and communication. Often the many cogs of the city government wheel are out of sync and do not connect the way they should. Communication and collaboration with colleagues and stakeholders is essential within and across agencies. Problem solving also requires making tough decisions. As city employees, we are at our best when those decisions, combined with tangible solutions, benefit the New Yorkers that we serve. It is this perspective and experience that I believe has prepared me to serve on the Taxi and Limousine Commission if appointed. The TLC, taxi drivers and owners, and the industry at large are going through a challenging time and have many problems to solve. It will require collaboration among all the stakeholders, analysis and data gathering, communication, and collective thought. The TLC is doing just that in a proactive, creative, and dynamic way through its many initiatives, including the recently announced expansion to the Medallion Relief Program with Marblegate Asset Management and the New York Taxi Worker Alliance that will provide hundreds of millions of dollars in debt relief to medallion owners. I look forward to being a part of and contributing to that process if I am approved, and I'm excited to get to know my colleagues on the commission and the hardworking staff at TLC. It will be a true honor to be part of transformational change that will support, expand, and sustain New York City's ground transportation system and all the New Yorkers it employs and serves. Thank you again for your consideration of my nomination to the TLC, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and congratulations again on your nomination. I'm going to first hand it over to our Transportation Chair, Councilor Selena Brooks Powers.
Thank you.
Thank you, and hello. It's nice to see you in person.
Hi, nice to see you in person too.
So when I first, as I mentioned when we spoke before, got appointed as chair for transportation infrastructure, some of the feedback I got from the, at the time, commissioner for TLC was that there was a need to have commissioners that, one, were New Yorkers, so I'm glad to know that you are a New Yorker, but two, folks that really understand the TLC space the regulatory rules and the nuances of it. And so I think that's important to know that we are appointing people that have that background. So I'm interested in understanding how your previous experience would be applicable to this role.
So, as I explained, I have had extensive experience both in legal and compliance. Procurement is a very heavily regulated sector, and in addition, now working in an operational capacity at DEP, we are heavily regulated. Compliance has been something that has been ingrained in me throughout my career. Being creative in ways where the circumstances are tough and where there's challenges has also been something that I've learned to do. I think that both of those things will translate into me being able to contribute in a meaningful way to the work that the commission has before it.
And as the borough president appointee to the Port Authority Technical Advisory Committees, what insights around for hire vehicle issues did you glean from that experience?
So that was a long time ago, and I think that driver retention and protecting driver revenue and their ability and the flexibility for them to earn a living has always been a challenge. And I think that the initiatives and the priorities of the TLC now have that top of mind. So I think, again, the issues continue, the problems continue, and I look forward to working with the commission on the initiatives that they have to address that.
And as a potential nominee for the TLC, what is your stance on the package of deliverista bills, and how can you work within the TLC structure to ensure the financial viability for our drivers?
You said the packages of, I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Deliverista bills? Deliveristas.
Okay. Well, I think that, again, the TLC is working collaboratively and with stakeholders to arrive and to come to consensus around solutions. Again, I think my ability to communicate, to collaborate, to understand a regulatory environment, to understand the importance of protecting, protecting the players in the space. I will, again, bring with me as a commissioner to work with the commission on the different initiatives that they have.
Are there any laws found in other major cities that you have found could protect the lives and welfare of our for-hire drivers?
I'm not familiar with what other municipalities or what other laws exist. I know that the TLC has the Owner Driver Resource Center, which has been extremely pivotal in servicing drivers with financial needs and other needs. The commission has also been very committed to protecting driver income. The recently announced initiative to expand the MRP is extremely important and will be a game changer. Again, I think that those concrete steps that the TLC is taking, along with other plans that they might have, are really important to doing that. As a commissioner, I look forward to understanding what their initiatives are, learning more, and working together with them to arrive at an implementable solution.
And then what are mechanisms to increase the rate of yellow cab service, especially in transportation deserts like in District 31, the one I represent?
So, again, living in Belrose, it's a bit of a transportation desert as well. So I think that it's really important to expand in an equitable and creative way the transportation options for people who live in those places, and they should be affordable. I think that there are the traditional for-hire bases and livery cab services in addition with Uber and Lyft that are servicing those areas, but again, increasing those options for both passengers and for drivers is really important. I think that the TLC is working on some initiatives that will do that, and again, as a new member, I would look at them, I would study them, and I would work collaboratively with my colleagues, with the staff, and with other stakeholders to decide which is the best, which would be the best thing to implement.
And just looking at staying in line with the Ubers and the Lyfts, and as we spoke about, the fact that the traditional yellow cab industry has, been significantly impacted over the years, been even worse during the pandemic. How do you feel like your role as a commissioner will work to create a space where the Ubers, the Lyfts, the yellow cabs could coexist? Do you have an opinion on the announcement from a few months ago in terms of Uber and the yellow cabs having this partnership? I'm interested in understanding your knowledge of this, because I think it's important that folks who are on the commission are completely knowledgeable about this right now, because it's like a level of crisis in terms of the opportunities for the cab drivers and the for-hire vehicles. So I'm interested in that perspective too.
So I think it's important that drivers have flexibility and options to earn a living, but it's equally as important for the TLC to protect driver income and also to ensure that there is transparency and clear communication about fee structure when taxi drivers actually accept dispatches from for-hire vehicle bases. So there is a current very tiny flex fare pilot that TLC had initiated, and again, that's very tiny in its reach. I do understand that there is another pilot with taxi drivers who will be able to accept dispatches from the for-hire vehicle bases. I think that both of those initiatives are being monitored by TLC, and they're getting data from that. So I think it's really important to look at the data and understand how that's impacting the drivers, what the positives are, what the negatives are, and that will lay the course for future action for the TLC. So again, those are the two things that I know about, and that I think again, as I get on the commission, if appointed and gain more experience, I'll be able to become much more informed and think through what those issues are.
So when if you're appointed, what do you come into the commission bringing in terms to be able to address some of these important issues right now that industry is grappling with? When you talk about the medallion issue, when you talk about the need to coexist between the yellow cabs and the for-hire vehicles, when you talk about commuter vans, right? We spoke about commuter vans earlier. I'm interested in knowing, because I know you mentioned you're not familiar with other major cities, what they're doing, but what do you bring into the commission that we could look forward to that could help to address some of these issues in that industry?
So I think, again, I have good skills in terms of communication. I am a good listener. I am a good consensus builder, and I like to solve problems. I do not shy away from a challenge, and there are a lot of things that I don't know, but I am very interested in getting to know what they are, and once I dig into that, I'm very dedicated to that. So I think that's an important skill set to bring to a commission that's now facing multiple challenges across its sector. So I think I'm bringing some really hard skills into the commission that would be really important. In terms of learning about the particular substance on these issues, I, as a citizen, would have my opinions, but it's really important to get all of the details from all of the different areas and all of the different positions. And my job as a commissioner is to take all that, synthesize that, work with my commissioners, my fellow commissioners, and come up with solutions. So I think being solution-driven, not being afraid to tackle problems, not being able to communicate in a straightforward, fashion, I think those will be helpful, not only to me as a commissioner, but to the commission in achieving some of its goals.
My last question is, have you begun to reach out to the drivers or stakeholders where you would have some level of oversight as a commissioner?
I have not done any sort of active outreach other than as I've kind of gotten into cabs lately asking questions, but that's just out of curiosity. But I do look forward to doing that in a more official capacity, and I would welcome all of that input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I only have a council member the chair answered a lot of my questions. I just had, I asked a lot of my questions, I should say. But I just, with the ongoing, one question I had with the ongoing conversation around congestion pricing in the city, one of the areas that I think has been in the conversation but not directly addressed at this point in time is the fate of the industry in terms of how they will interact with the congestion zone, meaning how, what will be the fees that they have to pay per ride, or whether, do you have any sort of thoughts on what might be the most desirable outcome for a taxi ride into the congestion zone, and whether there's, I think there's debate about whether it should be, per ride, or they should pay should they pay a fee or not? Just wondering, because I don't know that TLC has direct oversight over that, of course, but it does feel like there's going to be an industry response to that, and that's sort of ongoing right now. So I want to see if any thoughts on how that may be handled.
Yeah, thank you. I know that I think the MTA and the city is doing studies now that or will be releasing some data. So I think we have to look forward to that before and understand all the ramifications of that before taking a position. I would say that it's very important. An important outcome to however this plays out is that, again, the ability for drivers to earn and make a living is very important, and I think that is I think that has to be one of the major considerations when you're looking at all of the proposals.
Okay, thanks. And my last question is, when's the last time you took a yellow taxi?
I took a yellow taxi last week.
And what about an Uber or a for-hire vehicle?
For-hire vehicle, probably 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thanks.
I'm the biggest yellow cab council member in the United States of America.
She supports all their medallion prices staying stable.
I get into the cab and the driver say, "Hi, Gail," every single time. So just, oh my God. So anyway, I am very supportive of the yellow and greens not paying congestion pricing, period. Just, they already paid $250 to the MTA, enough already. So I just want to make that clear. I don't care about those Uber people. I don't care about them. Disabled. So obviously, my understanding is that the disabled community, accessiRide is a challenge. There has been, to the credit of TLC and to the mayor's office of people with disabilities, a lot of work so that the cabs are often able to be used by people who are disabled. So have you thought about this issues? Uber and Lyft, they kind of rely on the yellow cabs that are accessible to be their accessible point, but this community needs help. So I was just wondering if you thought about the disabled community and the Taxi and Limousine Commission.
I think it's very important, and I do think that it is at one of the top priorities for the TLC to have an accessible fleet and to reach its goals around accessibility. There's currently there's a way for anyone who wants a green or yellow taxi cab to get a wheelchair accessible vehicle. The for-hire vehicle bases are required to dispatch a percentage of their annual trips or work with a third-party dispatcher to make sure that the needs of that community are met. I think it's very important for the TLC to make sure that those for-hire vehicles are, or those for-hire bases are fulfilling their obligations under their regulations, and I look forward to any other initiative or pilot that TLC would roll out to increase accessibility.
Okay, I just think it's a community that has to be heard as often as possible, and I just don't want that to be lost. The second question I have is with data. Obviously, Mira, to her credit, made data the centerpiece, I think, of when she was a commissioner. So what ways in which do you think the data that really the TLC has more than any other agency can be used to help not only the taxi industry, but other industries, other city agencies, because you obviously have that kind of experience?
So data, as you said, data is really important. I think that having data is one thing, but being able to read data, being able to interpret data, and being able to package data so that it translates and it communicates to the different sectors is very important, to the different parts of the sector are very important. I also think that if you're inclined to be looking for certain things in data and maybe not in others, I think it's really important to be able to, again, package data so that things that might not have been important or might have been front and center for you are now made front and center. I would, as a commissioner, encourage and work with the TLC in any way to, again, to make that data, to package it, put it out there, and leverage it so that they can get what they need.
I think TLC is doing a great job. I just want to tell you that that should be continue to be a cornerstone, which I think with your commissioner it will, but it could be used by other agencies, because if you're the one that's going to say, I know how to solve problems, data is how you solve the problem. So the other agencies should use it more, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Okay. And I would also add to that how they collected their data and how they operationalized it, I think is also really important to communicate to their sister agencies, because to your point,
that's your
there's
job.
A lot of lessons learned there. And
That's be your job.
I will do that.
And then there are, I don't know, 6,000 yellow cabs sitting in garages. How do we get them mobilized, drivers, et cetera? I know I've asked you that. There's no easy answer, but do you have some suggestions?
Well, driver retention is extremely important, and making sure that, again, we have accessible and equitable transportation options everywhere is important. So I do think that TLC is working on some policies or on some rules that might help with that, and I look forward to working with them on that.
Just so you know, the data is not great, because most cab drivers today, they ask for cash, and then they give you a discount. So you will never catch that, just FYI. I don't know if everybody knows that, but I pay cash. You want to give me a discount? I'll take a discount. What the hell? So I'm just letting you know the data sucks in terms of many trips right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience as well. And we are going to now move into public testimony. We have 8 individuals signed up. We will first call up a panel, so we'll call all of you up at the same time. Simeon Bankoff, excuse me if I get this wrong, Cristobal Go, I believe you're a constituent of mine, and is it Andrea Goldwyn? Thanks. And if anybody else would like to be speaking, you can. Oh, hey there. You can open up the floor. If you wish to speak, you can fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant of Arms and wait to be recognized. We also are going to have a clock going, so we ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes. If you have a written statement, you can provide a copy to us, and to provide a copy of the statement to the Sergeant of Arms, and they will give a copy to us. With that being said, we'll go left to right. So we can start over here, and we will. My left, yes, you're right, yes.
Hello.
That is how that works. Anyway, nice to see you. You are on the clock. Go ahead.
Good. Good afternoon. I'm Christabel Goff from the Society for the Architecture of the City, which is a small all-volunteer historic preservation advocacy group. And we have been monitoring the Landmarks Preservation Commission since 1984, closely following their actions and policies. I am commenting on the reappointment of Sarah Carroll as chair of the commission. Clearly, this hearing is not a moment when agency policies will be reversed or even much affected. However, we would like to make a brief statement for the record. Under former Mayor de Blasio, the citywide assault on historic preservation was unremitting. It has included attempts to subvert the landmarks law by amendment, by revising and weakening administrative rules, by manipulating the statutory appointments process to leave all the commissioners serving without tenure at the pleasure of the mayor, so that any of them can be reappointed without his giving any reason at any time, all of them together. And also, the commission has been overseeing a regrettable turnover of experienced and dedicated civil service staff, all the while issuing public relations initiatives, such as the so-called interactive story map online, and not least, by celebrating an appearance of inclusivity by championing the designation of sites of no possible interest to the real estate industry, like the Kimblau Memorial Arch located on the traffic island. After his first chair, Meenakshi Srinivasan, resigned, do you want me to continue? Or?
You can finish up. Thanks.
Sarah Carroll was Mayor de Blasio's choice to continue to implement his administration's policies, and she has done so faithfully. Now, under the new administration, she has first astonished the community by presiding over the widely reported demolition of the Dangler mansion, which I believe Councilmember Osei mentioned earlier, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and she has initiated the so-called Business Express one-stop shopping process to expedite commercial alterations to landmark buildings without public review. Following these actions, Mayor Adams has announced her reappointment. This is not a proud moment for the city of New York, which was once a leader in the historic preservation movement in the United States. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Simeon Bankoff. I'm a professional preservationist. Since 1993, I've worked in the historic preservation field, mostly as an advocate, educator, and community organizer. I've been regularly monitoring the activities of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission for 25 years, and have worked both in collaboration and across purposes with the agency, its staff, and its leadership. As the Council is aware, the LPC's role is trifold. The agency is mandated to identify the city's historic resources, designate them as such, and regulate them. As an expert agency created during a time of progressive civic action, there's a great deal of flexibility and discretion built into New York City's landmarks law, which allows the Commission to adjust in response to changing civic priorities while keeping to its core principles. Measuring the success and efficacy of such a responsive agency over time is complicated. Is it in buildings surveyed, landmarks designated, permits issued? These actions all imply very different things over the lifespan of an agency. Let me pause here to praise the relative transparency of information the LPC and New York City government in general achieves. I've recently attempted a survey of other municipal preservation agencies throughout throughout the country, and the benchmarks are hidden if they are counted at all. Good job, New York. Regarding the reappointment of Ms. Sarah Carroll as the chair of the commission, I wish to frame my comments as observations about the work of the agency in general. However, let me state that I've professionally known Sarah Carroll since 1994 and have regularly had contact with her in her many roles in the agency. When she was first nominated during the de Blasio administration as chair, the professional preservation civic community jointly endorsed the nomination based on mutual experience working with Ms. Carroll and the sure knowledge of her deep devotion to the agency. After several chairs who had started as strangers to the agency, a familiar face was welcome. As council members are aware, the renomination of a sitting agency head from one administration to the next is unprecedented in the history of the commission and rare in New York City history. There is no reason to believe this remarkable nomination will not pass muster with this committee, as Ms. Carroll certainly possesses the requisite expertise for the position. The preservation goals...
I know you have a long testimony. Can you just do a summary of it? We have your written copy as well.
I've been sitting here for 4 hours. Okay. Here's the deal, which is I'm not here to indict anybody, but the fact is that we are concerned that over the last administration that the agency has drifted away from serving the public so much as it is servicing the property owners and the real estate industry. This is indicated by the numerous lawsuits that have been brought by community groups over the last 5 or 6 years. And it is our hope that under Ms. Carroll's leadership, it will reverse this trend and weigh all New Yorkers equally.
Good. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Powers. I'm Andrea Goldwyn speaking on behalf of the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy is a private, not-for-profit organization founded in 1973. Our mission is to preserve and protect historic resources throughout New York via advocacy and technical and financial support. The Conservancy is pleased to support the reappointment of Sarah Carroll as chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We have always had a good relationship with the Commission and have worked with Ms. Carroll for decades. She's a dedicated preservationist who rose through the ranks from preservation staff person to lead the agency. Her first term as chair was marked by notable successes. Ms. Carroll has continued the practice of her recent predecessors, focusing on designations of underrepresented neighborhoods and communities, designation of historic districts such as Oneida Street in the Bronx and Cambria Heights in eastern Queens, and individual landmarks such as the Kimlau Arch and the Axawatang Manohangwang, archaeological site in Staten Island recognize New York's diverse history. While the number of designations has declined recently, perhaps due to the period of political transition, we hope that it will increase going forward. 10 years ago, when Ms. Carroll was Director of Preservation, she received a Sloan Public Service Award, which recognizes outstanding civil servants. At the time, she was lauded for her unusual and admirable calm, sensitivity, and impartiality that made her a singularly effective negotiator, helping broker compromises to which all sides can agree. These attributes were certainly all evident as Ms. Carroll navigated a series of changes to the agency's rules to a successful vote. Under Ms. Carroll's leadership, the LPC made necessary adjustments in response to the pandemic. Early on, the agency pivoted quickly with a smooth transition to virtual hearings that expanded public participation. As part of New York's recovery, LPC has created a service for businesses to expedite the permit process, and we've heard few, if any, complaints about access to LPC
Thank you.
during this difficult time.
I know you're at the end. Can you no.
Thank you. We urge you to confirm this appointment and look forward to continuing to work with Ms. Carroll. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to the three of you. Just a quick question while I have you here. In addition to on the actual nomination here, are there recommendations for the council in terms of how we might be viewing landmarks or the landmark law? I know that you folks are dealing with this much more intimately than we are, except for maybe the projects that come up in our districts where as Councilor Ressler raised, particular issues that might arise at a moment in time. Are there policy-related things that you think that the council, and this is beyond the nomination today, but just in general that we should be looking at in terms of strengthening the law or ways to honor preservation in a way that's not being done right now?
Sure, by all means. And one thing that leapt out in the earlier conversation was the agreement between Department of Buildings and the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This is an interagency agreement, and as we can see, it sometimes just doesn't work as well as it should. If there was actual legislation that existed that could strengthen the position of buildings that were under consideration for the Landmarks Commission, be that a demolition delay, be that a legislation that would actually create real enforceable rules for the buildings department, so that the Landmarks Commission wouldn't have to say when a demolition permit has been issued, whoops, that's it. Because I've been doing this for a while, and frankly, when there is a demolition permit, more often than not, the LPC has their hands tied. And demolition permits also do not expire. Someone can pull a demo permit and it's gone it's off the books for forever. That is one easy and simple thing. Also, the commissioners should be paid.
Also, could I just add to that in this
yes.
question about the Dangler House? The commission could have acted to designate it. We've all been talking about the time when the protection expires, but they could have acted to designate on the day that they held the hearing. And it has been done before, and I've seen it done. And they did not do that, and that is why it doesn't exist anymore. Thank you.
Sure. Just to add to that, we are always interested in seeing more resources for the commission. The number of designations has grown substantially over the years. The number of permit applications has grown, and I'm sure that the staff is able to keep up as well as they can. But with more staff, things could get done more quickly. So we support that. And we would always be interested in the idea that the commissioners would be paid as the city planning commissioners are.
Great, no, those appreciate. Those are good recommendations. Thank you, and we'll probably follow up with you on some of those. Thanks, guys. Thank you for your patience and being here. We will now go to, we'll have a two people panel, and then we're going to go to Zoom. We have Michael Adams and Elena Sassauer. And again, we have 2 minutes. To the degree you have testimony that looks bigger than that, you may want to take the opportunity to summarize some of it. Thanks. Excuse me?
I have two sets of testimony. I'm testifying in opposition to two appointees.
Okay, you can use your opportunity to do both, right? So you have 2 minutes, thanks.
For each.
You have 2 minutes to testify. You can use that however you desire to go. Ma'am, if you want to be part of this hearing, we'll have you here. You have 2 minutes like everybody else does. You can use that opportunity to testify as you desire. We're not offering people multiple rounds of testimony. You can submit your written testimony, which we'll take a look at, and we'll take your 2-minute testimony. Start the gentleman here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen from the council. I'm Michael Henry Adams. Unless you've worked as closely with the Landmarks Preservation Commission as I have for the past 36 years, you probably are unaware that it is a racist and elitist institution. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say that Sarah Carroll is one of the worst culprits in its history. And you might say, why? She seems so nice. But the problem is that she offers hope without giving any hope or without changing anything. She invokes the name of George Floyd, saying how this means that the city government, including the Landmarks Preservation Commission, must change how it does things from now on. And she initiates her equity framework, but then things are done exactly the same as they've always been done. Too little, too late. Justice denied, and because justice continues to be delayed. And worse, it's done in such a way that it's guaranteed that by the time the commission, with their rules that they only designate 2 districts a year citywide, that they only designate X number of individual landmarks in a given year, by the time they get around to all of the worthy buildings in communities of color, in Harlem and the Bronx and Brooklyn, they'll be destroyed. And this is just wrong. She specifically has looked at the landmarks law and the landmarks history, and she has looked at 857 Riverside Drive, which is a house that was built by an abolitionist who was a colleague of Mr. Truesdale on Duffield Street, and she has used the exact same arguments that were used with the Truesdale house to keep it from being designated.
Thank you. You can summarize if you'd like it then.
Thank you. To keep it from being designated for a decade, she's used those same arguments that it's been too changed. But, of course, in the past, the landmarks law has been used to take altered buildings, changed buildings, moved buildings, like the Lewis Latimer House, like Strivers Row, and to restore them.
Thank you.
And this is what is so unfortunate, that people are being told that we're helping you, when, in fact, that's not the case whatsoever.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I have 2-minute testimony for 2 separate appointees.
Ma'am,
I registered for 2. I prepared for 2.
you have an opportunity to testify. You have 2 minutes, just like everybody else does, and we're not taking multiple rounds.
Has been appearing with respect to a single
That's okay.
nominee. I have 2 separate.
Ma'am, this isn't an argument. You have 2 minutes. You can go ahead and testify, and you should go ahead.
Press
Thanks.
is here. It should be reported. Please deem my testimony as under oath and subject to the penalties of perjury. My name is Elena Ruth Sasauer. I am director and co-founder of the nonpartisan nonprofit citizens organization Center for Judicial Accountability that documents corruption in the judiciary. Cases are perfect paper trails. There's a record, so it's easy to document judicial corruption. These are the words I spoke on September 17th, 2013, before the Commission to Investigate Public Corruption in the presence of Milton Williams, Jr., one of its 3 co-chairs. I appear here today before you in opposition to Mr. Williams' confirmation as chair of the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board. Acting on his conflicts of interest, born of personal, professional, and political relationships, Mr. Williams successively used positions of public trust to which he was appointed to betray his duties and the public. In 2013 to 14, as co-chair of the Commission to Investigate Public Corruption. In 2015, as a member of the Commission on Statewide Attorney Discipline. At present, and since 2019, as one of the 2 vice chairs of the First Department Attorney Grievance Committee. He did this with knowledge that he was thereby abetting and perpetuating judicial corruption involving the State Commission on Judicial Conduct and the State Attorney General in collusion with New York's executive and legislative branches and ethics and criminal authorities, wholly subverting constitutional state governance, stealing massive amounts of taxpayer monies, and causing vast and irreparable injury to the people of New York. I have furnished written testimony with substantiating particulars, hyperlinked to the evidence. It is posted on our website, www.judgewatch.org, accessible from the top panel, Latest News. Based on the evidence furnished by my written testimony, Mr. Williams cannot be confirmed by you, as he flagrantly does not meet the standard fixed by the Charter for the Conflicts of Interest Board, quote, independence,
Thank you.
integrity,
We have an opportunity to
civic
summarize.
commitment, and high ethical standards. He is a corrupter unfit for
Ma'am,
any office of public
you have to
trust.
finish up and summarize.
I am
Thank you.
available to answer questions, to assist you in discharging your charter-mandated duties. I have furnished Mr. Williams
Thank
with
you.
my written testimony
Ma'am,
expressly
you can submit your
so that he
testimony
might
to
have a
us, and
due
we will accept
process
written
opportunity
testimony.
to respond.
Thank you.
You must require him to do so. I have testimony in opposition to the appointment of
We will
Anthony
take
Crowell
your testimony as
to
well.
the New York City Planning.
Okay, we're going to call the next panel. Thank you. You can submit your testimony to us, and we will read it and take it into account.
I have.
Okay, you have folks who are also...
However, I registered to also be permitted, and I was told that I would be able to testify to an additional appointee.
Everybody who comes here has the same amount of time.
Why should I be limited to one when there are two? It's 2 minutes.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to now call up the next panel online.
This is corruption. This is corruption.
We're going to call Michael Hiller,
you must
Sean
exercise
Kersandi.
advice and consent.
Can you remove her things?
This is corruption.
Council members, may I please be allowed to address the question you asked of the earlier panel as to what
On the policy
remedies-
question? On the landmarks question about policy? Go
Yes.
ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. There are three things I would suggest quickly. I would reiterate, as Simeon Bankoff said, the commissioners should be paid. There are all sorts of African Americans and Latinos who can't afford to volunteer their time to work on the commission, and that's a great problem. In addition to that, there are jurisdictions where council members have the ability to nominate buildings and districts, and that would be a great thing because you would hear directly from your constituents, and they would tell you what they think is important. And then finally, something I think that could be beneficial citywide would be in the theater district, when they wanted to designate Broadway theaters, they allowed them to transfer air rights district-wide. And in the new Midtown East district, they allowed the same thing. If that were to happen for landmarks citywide, it would create problems of its own, but I think it would go a long way to making landmarking more popular and more practical, particularly for not-for-profits that otherwise often find that they have no choice but to demolish their buildings.
Yeah, no, thank you for those recommendations. I represent both Midtown and the theater district, so I'm familiar with those, and I appreciate those. Thank you for your testimony and suggestions as well. We're going to now call a Zoom panel, Michael Hiller, Sean Kersandi, and Susan Sullivan. We'll start with Mr. Hiller.
Starting time.
My name is Michael Hiller. I'm a managing principal of Hiller PC, which has a substantial concentration in preservation law, representing only preservationists and communities which seek to preserve city landmarks, not developers. And I've been doing this work for over 25 years. I'm here today to discuss the procedures deployed at the Commission, procedures which Chair Carroll inherited, so I don't blame her for them. But they are procedures which heavily favor development and which must be changed if the landmarks law is ever to once again provide the protective apparatus necessary to preserve our city's landmarks. In particular, at the Commission, developers submitting proposals for work affecting landmark assets are afforded unlimited time, often up to a year, to confer with Commission staff to fine-tune proposals before they are considered by the commissioners. Once the proposals are finalized, developers and their experts provide a presentation directly to the commissioners, often for up to an hour or longer on heavily contested application, followed by a lengthy Q&A. Thereafter, whenever the commission meets to discuss a developer's proposal, the developer and its experts are again afforded unlimited time to address the commissioners and provide testimony, none of which is sworn. By contrast, members of the public, including preservationists, are not permitted to meet with staff while proposals are being prepared or at any other time. That right exists solely for developers. Worse, while developers are afforded unlimited time to develop their presentations to the commission, opposition receives just 3 to 5 days before the first and only public hearing to prepare a response. Thus, while developers are given unlimited time to develop their proposals and fine-tune them with the staff, members of the public are given 3 to 5 days to hire counsel, engage experts, galvanize community support, and prepare testimony. And unlike the developers, members of the public get just one opportunity to address commissioners, and only for a total of 3 minutes. After that, the public is resigned to sitting in silence as the commissioners and developers talk amongst themselves. This process is obviously heavily skewed towards development, and the results speak for themselves. I'm aware of only one publicly contested application at the commission that has been denied in the last 12 years. As a consequence of developer-friendly procedures, the commission has approved substantial disfiguring changes to landmarks all over the city. I don't blame commissioners for these outcomes. Generally, they only hear from developers, except for that 1 3-minute soundbite from opposition at a single hearing.
Time is up.
I'll wrap up. I would analogize this to a boxing match where only one boxer gets to meet with the referee beforehand, train for a year, and throw punches for 15 rounds during the fight, while the opposing boxer doesn't get to meet with anyone beforehand, gets only 3 to 5 days to prepare for the fight, and then can only throw punches on the first round. So what I'm suggesting to you, as I'll just wrap up, is that the commission should, in answering to your question earlier, the commission should be required to adopt the same procedures as the BSA does. Excuse me, so that there's some even-handedness. Otherwise, you're going to see a continuation of the decline of landmarking in the city of New York and the loss of historic assets, several of which you've heard about today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. We'll now go to Sean Kersandi, Susan Sullivan.
Starting time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members, Chair Powers. Sean Corsandi for Landmark West, a nonprofit community organization committed to the preservation and architectural heritage of the Upper West Side. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee writes in support of the reappointment of Landmarks Preservation Commission Chair Sarah Carroll. As a neighborhood native, Chair Carroll grew up within our districts and which helped train her keen eye for the nuances of New York City's streetscapes. She is equally adept at assessing the value of mid-block rows, as well as discerning the idiosyncrasies of its individual component structures. We have seen this vision in action at countless hearings over the years as she discusses the architectural and technical merits of applications, both of landmark stewards and her fellow commissioners. Although these are landmarks, change is inevitable, and Chair Carroll has helped ensure that change, when necessary, is as unobtrusive as possible or improves upon what's being replaced. And while our committee does not always agree with the viewpoints and ultimate decisions, we admit that we feel heard. Even at seemingly endless hearings, Chair Carroll is patient and respectful to all members of the public and ensures that they have an opportunity to participate. She encourages applicants to respond, and this generates a dialogue of understanding lost when decisions are made top-down or through blanket proclamations. This standard procedure has garnered Chair Carroll the respect of both the preservation community as well as owners. The built environment is an asset that must be collectively nurtured, and Chair Carroll's empathy is refreshing among city agencies. There's always work to be done, like for our public housing and National Register sites on the Upper West Side. And Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee remains willing to continue to work with Chair Carroll in her second term. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Susan Sullivan, and if anybody else is here to testify, you can just raise your hand in the chat and we will get to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Sullivan, a board member of the Center at West Park. As everyone at this hearing is well aware, the task of the Landmark Preservation Commission is formidable. The LPC is the custodian of the physical history of New York City, not what we read about in books, but what we can touch, the buildings, the bridges, the parks in every borough. Landmarks are found on the neighborhood street corners, those that reflect our past and inform our future, those that add to the texture of our everyday lives, those that identify and celebrate New York City, whether next to the bus stop, like West Park Presbyterian, or in the middle of Central Park, like Bethesda Fountain or Belvedere Castle. All of those landmarks are touchstones for our community, landmarks which define who we are and where we are. Under Sarah Carroll's leadership as chair of the LPC, she has helped navigate the landmark designation of more than 2,000 historic sites. That is quite extraordinary, especially in this city where the real estate industry rules and where empty lots are absolute gold. For instance, potentially an empty lot that could be delivered on the corner of the intersection of 86th and Amsterdam if West Park Church is de-designated, de-landmarked, and raised for a high rise and a $33 million windfall for the presbytery. However, I trust Sarah Carroll to protect our designated landmarks. So our board president, Mim Warden, and I, along with our entire Upper West Side neighborhood, applaud Sarah Carroll's reappointment as chair of the LPC, knowing that she values the palpable history of New York City. Our trust is in the LPC and Sarah Carroll as its leader to honor our designated landmarks and work with us, our adaptive reuse of West Park as the center at West Park, a performing arts center. Thank you so much and good afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Do we have any hands on the Zoom? Nobody for now? Okay. Thank you everyone for being here today and for your patience and your testimony. And you can submit written testimony if you have further comments. Thanks everyone. This is adjourned.